3 years ago, Duke Rowan Blackmoor made the worst mistake of his life, banishing his wife Lydia on nothing but wounded pride and half-heard whispers. Blinded by a carriage accident and poisoned by suspicion, he threw away the one person who truly loved him. Now he lives alone in his crumbling estate, bitter and broken, convinced she betrayed him with his rival. But when a mysterious nurse named Clara arrives to care for him, everything begins to change. She knows his house too well. Her voice sounds hauntingly familiar, and the lavender scent she wears awakens memories he's tried to bury. What Rowan doesn't know is that Clara and Lydia are the same woman, and she's come back to save the man who destroyed her. If you want to see how this story of pride, betrayal, and impossible redemption unfolds, stay with us until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. The servants whispered that Duke Rowan Blackmoor had become a monster. They said it in hushed voices when they thought he couldn't hear, forgetting that blindness had sharpened every other sense he possessed. He heard everything now. The scrape of boots against marble as maids hurried past his study, the nervous catch in the butler's throat when delivering the day's correspondence, the way conversations died the moment he entered a room. Let them whisper, let them fear him. It was better than pity. Rowan sat in the massive leather chair that had belonged to his father, his unseen eyes fixed on nothing, his hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. The study smelled of old books and dying fires, of dust settling on surfaces no one dared clean too thoroughly. The great Blackmoor estate, once the jewel of the county, had become a tomb, and he was its only occupant. "Your Grace, the new nurse has arrived," his butler Edmund announced from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. Rowan's jaw tightened. "I didn't request a nurse. Mr. Hartley took the liberty of arranging it, sir. He felt that given the recent incidents, professional care might be advisable." The recent incidents, a diplomatic way of referring to Rowan's violent collision with a side table last week, the gash on his forehead still healing. Or perhaps the broken vase from 3 days ago when he'd misjudged a turn and sent a priceless Ming Dynasty piece crashing to the floor. "Tell Hartley to mind his own damn business," Rowan growled, "and send whoever it is away. I don't need a nursemaid." "I'm afraid it's too late for that, Your Grace." A woman's voice, calm and utterly unintimidated, came from somewhere behind Edmund. "I've traveled quite far, and I don't intend to leave without at least meeting my new patient." Rowan's head snapped toward the sound. There was something about that voice, smooth, measured, with an underlying strength that most people lost when speaking to him these days. No tremor, no fear, just quiet confidence. "Edmund, who authorized this intrusion?" Rowan demanded. "I did, Your Grace." His estate manager's voice joined the growing chorus in his doorway. Hartley had been managing Blackmoor's affairs since before the accident, one of the few people Rowan still trusted. "The household staff has been stretched thin, and your condition requires—" "My condition," Rowan interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is none of your concern. I am blind, Hartley, not invalid. I don't need some stranger poking around my home, pretending to care while collecting a generous salary for the privilege of watching me stumble through doorways. Then I suppose it's fortunate that I don't pretend anything, Your Grace." The woman's voice again, closer now. She must have stepped into the room without him hearing. That alone set him on edge. People didn't sneak up on Rowan Blackmoor. Not anymore. "And if you're going to insult me, you might as well know my name. Clara Whitmore." The name meant nothing to him, but something in the way she said it, the particular cadence of her speech, tugged at something buried deep in his memory. He pushed the feeling away. "Miss Whitmore," he said coldly, "I'm sure you're very qualified. I'm equally sure there are dozens of patients who would benefit from your care. I am not one of them. Edmund will arrange your transportation back to wherever you came from." "Actually, Edmund will do no such thing." Clara's footsteps crossed the room, confident strides, unhesitating. She moved like someone who knew exactly where the furniture was positioned. "Mr. Hartley hired me for 3 months, paid in advance. That contract stands whether you cooperate or not. So you have 2 choices, Your Grace. We can work together to improve your quality of life, or you can waste the next 12 weeks making both of us miserable while I collect my salary anyway. Rowan felt his face flush with anger. No one spoke to him like this. No one dared. Get out. No. The single word hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. Rowan heard Edmund's sharp intake of breath, Hartley's muttered curse. They expected an explosion. They would get one. He surged to his feet, his hand sweeping across the desk and sending papers and ledgers cascading to the floor. I said, get out. I don't need your help. I don't want your pity. And I certainly don't require some bleeding heart charity worker reorganizing my life like I'm a charity case. Silence. Then Clara's voice, maddeningly calm. Are you finished? The question caught him so off guard that his rage stuttered. What? I asked if you were finished with the tantrum. Her footsteps moved again, and he heard the soft rustle of papers being gathered from the floor. Because once you're done breaking things and shouting at people trying to help you, we have work to do. I don't have work to do with you. You do, actually. For starters, this study is a death trap. You've got obstacles everywhere. Furniture positioned at odd angles, sharp corners at head height. It's a wonder you haven't seriously injured yourself already. This is my study. I know where everything is. Do you? Something scraped across wood. She was moving something on his desk. Then tell me, where's the paperweight that was sitting 3 inches from your right hand? Rowan's hand automatically moved to where he remembered the heavy crystal piece always resting. His fingers found empty space. Damn her. Parlor tricks, he muttered. Reality checks, she corrected. You're navigating based on memory, Your Grace, but memory is unreliable. Things get moved. People shift furniture to clean. You need to learn to navigate based on spatial awareness and consistent markers, not assumptions about where things used to be. I didn't ask for a lecture. No, you asked for isolation and self-pity. Sadly, that's not what Mr. Hartley hired me to provide. Clara's voice moved toward the door. I'll be in the East Wing arranging my quarters. Dinner is at 7. I expect you in the dining room. I take my meals in my study. Not anymore. Eating alone in the dark while surrounded by clutter isn't dining, Your Grace. It's hiding. Her footsteps paused at the threshold. 7 o'clock, the blue dining room. Don't be late. And then she was gone, leaving Rowan trembling with fury in the wreckage of his disrupted sanctuary. Well, the clock in the hall struck 7. Rowan remained in his study, arms crossed, defiant. He heard the dining room door open and close twice in the next 15 minutes. Staff serving dinner? No doubt. Let the food grow cold. Let Miss Clara Whitmore sit alone at that oversized table and realize that Duke Rowan Blackmoor didn't take orders from hired help. At 7:30, his stomach growled. He ignored it. At 8 o'clock, Edmund knocked softly. Your Grace, Miss Whitmore has requested a tray be sent to your study. Has she now? Rowan's voice dripped with sarcasm. How generous of her to acknowledge defeat. She said, and I quote, His Grace can eat in his cave tonight, but tomorrow we begin properly. Edmund paused. She also mentioned that the cook prepared your favorite, roasted duck with cherry reduction. Rowan's favorite. How did she know that? The tray arrived minutes later, and despite his determination to remain angry, Rowan found himself eating with more appetite than he'd had in weeks. The duck was perfectly prepared, the potatoes seasoned exactly as he preferred. Someone had paid attention to details most of the current staff wouldn't know. He was finishing the last of his wine when he heard a sound from the hallway, light footsteps, then the distinct creak of the third stair from the bottom of the main staircase. He'd stepped on that stair 10,000 times in his life. He knew its voice. Clara was walking through his house late at night. Curiosity, that dangerous emotion he'd thought long dead, stirred in his chest. Moving as quietly as he could, Rowan eased his study door open and stood in the hallway, listening. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate. She was in the portrait gallery now. He could tell by the particular echo that high-ceilinged space created. What was she looking at? The family portraits that documented 5 generations of Blackmoors? The landscapes his mother had commissioned? Or perhaps the large painting that had hung at the end of the gallery until 3 years ago, the one he'd ordered removed and burned? You should be in bed, Your Grace. Rowan jerked, startled. Clara's voice came from directly behind him. He hadn't heard her approach. Again. How did you... The portrait gallery is a dead end. I doubled back through the servants' passage. Her voice held a hint of amusement. Did you think I wouldn't notice you following me? I wasn't following you, I was securing my own house. At 9 o'clock at night? In your nightshirt and bare feet? The amusement was open now. Very thorough security measures, Your Grace. Rowan felt heat creep up his neck. What were you doing in the portrait gallery? Looking at your family history. Impressive lineage. Your great-grandfather was quite the character, from what the plaques say. Started as a merchant's son and built an empire through shipping. You read the plaques. It wasn't a question. Of course she had. Why wouldn't she? Among other things, Clara's voice shifted, became softer. There's a gap at the end of the gallery, a lighter patch on the wallpaper where something large used to hang. What was it? Rowan's hands clenched into fists. Nothing important. Important enough to remove completely. She moved past him, her sleeve brushing his arm. The scent of lavender drifted in her wake, subtle, familiar, achingly painful. Important enough that you can't stand to be reminded of it. My past is none of your concern. Your present is, though, and your past is affecting your present quite dramatically. Clara's footsteps stopped at what he knew was the exact spot where the painting had hung. Who was she, Your Grace? I don't know what you're talking about. The woman whose portrait you removed, the one you're trying so desperately to forget. Clara's voice was gentle now, almost kind. It was somehow worse than her earlier bluntness. The one who still haunts you. Get out. The words came out barely above a whisper. Rowan. Get out! He roared it this time, his voice echoing through the empty gallery. You know nothing about my life, nothing about what I've lost, nothing about... He stopped abruptly. She'd called him Rowan. Not Your Grace or Sir, just Rowan. As if she had the right. As if they were... I apologize, Your Grace. Clara's voice was formal again, distant. That was inappropriate. I overstepped. Yes, he agreed harshly. You did. It won't happen again. Her footsteps moved toward the servants' passage. Good night, Your Grace. Breakfast is at 8. I'll expect you in the morning room. I'm not coming to breakfast. Yes, you are. She paused in the doorway. Because, despite what you think, you're not dead yet, Rowan Blackmoor. You're just hiding, and I don't have time for cowards. The words hit him like a physical blow. Coward. Him. Duke Rowan Blackmoor, who'd faced down business rivals and political enemies, who'd built his fortune through calculated risks and iron will. A coward? How dare you? But she was already gone, vanished into the servants' corridors like a ghost, leaving only the fading scent of lavender and the echo of an accusation he couldn't quite deny. Rowan didn't sleep that night. He paced his chambers, counting steps, rebuilding the mental map he'd constructed of his rooms. 12 steps from bed to window, 8 from window to door, 15 from door to washstand. The familiar dimensions usually brought comfort. Tonight they felt like prison bars. Coward. The word circled his thoughts like a vulture. He wasn't hiding. He was protecting himself. There was a difference. 3 years ago, he'd had everything. A dukedom that commanded respect across England. A business empire that rivaled even old established families. Political connections that opened doors others couldn't even approach. And Lydia. He forced himself to think her name for the first time in months. Lydia Blackmoor. His duchess. His wife. The woman he'd loved with an intensity that had frightened him even in the midst of their happiness. The woman who'd betrayed him with his greatest rival. The memory still had teeth. 6 months after their wedding, he'd been returning from London unexpectedly when the carriage accident had shattered his spine and stolen his sight. For weeks he'd hovered between life and death, consciousness coming and going in painful waves. And during one of those waves, he'd heard them. Voices in the hallway outside his bedroom. Lydia's voice, clear and bright with emotion. And Lord Marcus Thornwood's answering rumble. The shipping magnate who'd been competing with Rowan for a crucial government contract, the man who'd sworn to see Blackmoor humbled. He hadn't caught all the words, but he'd heard enough. Something about secured and papers signed, and then Lydia's laugh, not the gentle laugh he'd fallen in love with, but something sharp and triumphant. and Thornwood's response, "Your husband never suspected a thing." When Rowan had finally recovered enough to speak, to demand answers, Lydia had tried to explain. But he'd been too angry, too hurt, too broken to listen. He'd seen, or rather, in his blindness, he'd finally understood the truth. She'd married him for his title and fortune, and when the accident had left him helpless, she'd taken the opportunity to sell him out to his enemy. He'd banished her that very night, signed papers revoking her access to the estate, to his accounts, to everything bearing the Blackmoor name. His solicitor had tried to counsel restraint, to suggest he at least hear her full explanation. But Rowan had been beyond reason, and Lydia had left without a fight, which had only confirmed his suspicions. If she'd been innocent, wouldn't she have stayed? Wouldn't she have demanded he listen? Instead, she'd vanished into the night, and he'd heard nothing from her since. Good riddance. So why did the scent of lavender make his chest ache? Why did a stranger's use of his first name sound so achingly familiar? Why did Clara Whitmore move through his house like she'd lived there her whole life? You're being paranoid, he told himself. One woman sounds like another. One scent triggers memories. It means nothing. But as dawnlight began creeping through his windows, light he couldn't see but could sense in the changing temperature of the air, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that Clara Whitmore was hiding something. And despite every vow he'd made to never trust anyone again, he wanted desperately to know what it was. At exactly 8 o'clock, Rowan entered the morning room. He debated refusing, considered staying in his study out of pure stubbornness. But Clara's accusation, coward, had festered through the sleepless night, and somewhere around dawn he'd decided that proving her wrong mattered more than protecting his pride. The morning room was smaller than the main dining hall, which made navigation easier. Rowan had counted the steps dozens of times, 14 from the door to the table, 3 more to his usual chair. He made the journey smoothly, refusing to extend his hands or shuffle his feet like an invalid. "Good morning, Your Grace," Clara's voice came from the direction of the window. "I'm impressed. Exactly on time." "I'm punctual by nature, Miss Whitmore, not by coercion." "Of course," he heard the smile in her voice. "The coffee is directly in front of you, cream and 2 sugars already added, precisely how you prefer it." Rowan's hand found the cup easily enough. The coffee was perfect, hot but not scalding, sweetened exactly right. "You've been interrogating my staff about my preferences." "I've been learning how to do my job effectively. There's a difference." The scrape of a chair being pulled back. "May I sit?" "It's my breakfast room. You hardly need permission." "Courtesy costs nothing, Your Grace." She settled into the chair, the one to his left, he noted. Not across from him where most people position themselves when speaking to him, beside him instead, as if they were allies at the same table rather than adversaries. "We need to discuss your schedule." "I don't have a schedule." "Exactly the problem. Human beings need structure, Your Grace, especially when recovering from trauma." "I'm not recovering from anything. The blindness is permanent." "I was referring to the emotional trauma of losing your independence, not the physical condition of your eyes." Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. "You spent 3 years in this house hiding from the world. That's not living, that's existing. We're going to change that." "We," Rowan said slowly, "are not going to do anything. You are a nurse, Miss Whitmore, hired to ensure I don't brain myself on furniture. You are not my therapist, my social coordinator, or my keeper. Actually, Mr. Hartley's instructions were quite clear. Restore you to functionality. That includes physical, mental, and social health." Hartley exceeded his authority. "Hartley cares about you, which is more than you're currently doing for yourself." Clara paused, and he heard liquid being poured, tea, from the scent. "We're going to start simple. Morning routine. Bathing, dressing, breakfast. Then a walk through the gardens to rebuild your spatial awareness and physical conditioning. Lunch. Afternoon work. You have an estate to run, correspondence to answer, accounts to review. Evening meal, then leisure time as you prefer." "I prefer to manage my own time." "You prefer to hide in your study and feel sorry for yourself while your estate crumbles around you." The words were harsh, but her tone remained calm. "Your steward has been making decisions without your input for 2 years. Your tenants haven't seen you in 3. Your business holdings are being managed by a board who increasingly ignores your written instructions because you're not present to enforce them. You're becoming irrelevant, Your Grace. Is that what you want? The observation struck home harder than Rowan wanted to admit. He'd known things were slipping, but acknowledging it meant facing the larger truth that his self-imposed isolation was destroying everything his family had built. And you think a daily walk through the gardens will solve that? He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. I think learning to navigate your own property without fear is a start. I think remembering you're still the Duke of Blackmoor and acting like it would help. I think stopping your retreat from life might prevent your complete irrelevance. Clara set her cup down with a decisive click. But ultimately, Your Grace, that choice is yours. I can give you tools. I can push you to use them, but I can't want recovery more than you do. Rowan sat in silence, his coffee growing cold between his hands. She was right. He hated that she was right, hated her clear-eyed assessment of his failures, hated the way she saw through every excuse he'd constructed. But mostly, he hated that some part of him, some small, stubborn part he'd thought dead, wanted to prove her right about something else, that he wasn't beyond saving. One walk, he said finally. Through the gardens. If I humiliate myself tripping over every root and hedge, we abandon this experiment. Agreed. Clara stood, her chair scraping against wood. Finish your breakfast first. Cook made fresh scones, and they're best warm. How did you know scones are my... He stopped. More intelligence gathering from the staff? Something like that. Her voice held an odd note, almost wistful. The raspberry preserves are particularly good today, just the right balance of sweet and tart. Raspberry preserves. His favorite since childhood, when his mother used to sneak him extra servings against Cook's protests. You're very thorough, Miss Whitmore. I try to be, Your Grace. Her footsteps moved toward the door. I'll meet you in the main hall in 30 minutes. Wear proper shoes. The garden paths can be uneven. I'm blind, not incompetent. I know how to dress myself. Of course you do. That hint of a smile again. Just like you knew where your paperweight was yesterday? She was gone before he could formulate a response, leaving Rowan alone with his cooling coffee, perfect scones, and the uncomfortable realization that Clara Whitmore was going to be far more difficult to dismiss than he'd anticipated, and more dangerous to his carefully maintained defenses than anyone since... No, he wouldn't think about her, wouldn't compare every woman's voice to the one that had promised to love him forever and then destroyed him. Lydia was gone. That chapter was closed. But as Rowan reached for a scone and caught again that subtle scent of lavender lingering in the air, he couldn't quite convince himself that the past was as buried as he'd believed. Some ghosts, it seemed, refused to stay dead. The gardens had become a wilderness. Rowan stood at the top of the terrace steps, Clara's hand resting lightly on his forearm, and breathed in the scent of neglect. Overgrown roses tangled with weeds, untrimmed hedges sprawled beyond their borders. Even the gravel paths crunched differently beneath his feet, less maintained, more chaotic. When did I stop caring? He murmured, not meaning to speak aloud. The day you decided the world wasn't worth seeing anymore. Clara's response was immediate, unflinching. Shall we? She guided him down the steps with practiced ease, her touch firm but not controlling. Most people who'd tried to help him navigate treated him like fragile crystal, hovering, overcorrecting, making him feel helpless. Clara simply walked beside him, her hand on his arm, more partnership than assistance. 3 steps down, she said calmly. Then level ground for approximately 20 paces before the first turn. Rowan took the stairs slowly, hating how uncertain each step felt. His world had become a series of educated guesses and potential disasters. One miscalculation, and he'd be sprawling across the terrace like a drunk. But he made it down without incident, and the gravel path beneath his feet did feel familiar, even through 3 years of neglect. The rose garden is to your left, Clara continued, though I use the term garden loosely. It's more of a thorny labyrinth at this point. When did you last have gardeners working the grounds? I dismissed them 2 years ago. Rowan's jaw tightened at the memory. They kept asking questions, offering sympathies, looking at me like I was some tragic figure from a Gothic novel. So you chose isolation over pity. Wouldn't you? Clara was silent for a long moment, her hand tightening almost imperceptibly on his arm. I might have. Once. Her voice carried an odd weight. But pity and compassion aren't the same thing, Your Grace. One diminishes you. The other acknowledges your humanity while respecting your strength. Very philosophical for a morning walk. Would you prefer I comment on the weather instead? It's unseasonably warm for March. The crocuses are blooming early. Despite himself, Rowan felt his lips twitch toward something that might have been a smile. Are they purple or white? Both. Purple along the eastern border, white near the old fountain. There are yellow ones too, but they're being strangled by ivy. Clara paused. Turn coming in 3, 2, 1. Now, the path curves left around the fountain. The fountain. Rowan's breath caught. He hadn't thought about the fountain in 3 years. It had been Lydia's favorite spot. She used to sit on the marble edge in the evenings, trailing her fingers through the water while they talked about everything and nothing. Stop. The word came out harsher than he'd intended. Clara halted immediately. What's wrong? This path. We're taking a different route. Your Grace, the fountain path is the most direct. I said we're taking a different route. Rowan pulled his arm from her grasp, immediately regretting it when the world tilted dangerously without her anchor. The western path. Through the kitchen gardens. The western path hasn't been maintained in years. The flagstones are uneven. There are tree roots breaking through. It's completely unsuitable for... I don't care. Rowan turned in what he hoped was the right direction. Either guide me there or leave me alone. Silence stretched between them, broken only by bird song and the distant sound of wind through overgrown hedges. Then Clara's hand returned to his arm, her grip tighter this time. Fine. But when you break your ankle on a tree root, I'm saying I told you so. Her voice had gone flat, professional. Turn right, 15 paces forward, then a hard left. They navigated the western path in tense silence. Clara had been right. The route was treacherous. Twice Rowan stumbled on uneven stones. Once a low-hanging branch caught his shoulder hard enough to bruise. But he gritted his teeth and kept moving, driven by a stubbornness even he didn't fully understand. He just couldn't face that fountain. Couldn't stand on the spot where he'd proposed to Lydia under a full moon, where she'd said yes with tears streaming down her face, where he'd believed like a fool that he'd found something real. There's a bench ahead, Clara said finally, her voice still carefully neutral. Oak. Weather-worn but still sturdy. Shall we rest? I'm not tired. I am. She steered him toward it anyway. Humor me. The bench was where she'd described it, solid and familiar beneath his hands. Rowan sat heavily, his breathing labored more from emotion than exertion. Clara settled beside him with a soft rustle of skirts. You loved her very much, Clara said quietly. Rowan stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. The woman whose portrait you removed. The reason you won't go near the fountain. Clara's voice was gentle, almost sad. You loved her, and she hurt you, and now you can't bear the places that remind you of her. My past is not your concern. Your past is affecting your present, which makes it exactly my concern. Clara shifted on the bench. What happened, Your Grace? Nothing that matters anymore. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't be avoiding half your estate to escape the memories. A pause. Was she your wife? The question hit like a physical blow. Rowan's hands clenched on the bench's weathered wood. That's none of your... The staff talk, you know. They say you were married once, that the Duchess left shortly after your accident. Clara's tone remained maddeningly even. They say you haven't spoken her name in 3 years. The staff should learn to keep their mouths shut. They care about you, in their own way. Clara sighed. Did she leave because of the blindness? She left because she was a liar and a traitor. The words erupted before Rowan could stop them, 3 years of bitterness spilling out. She married me for my title and my fortune, and when the accident made me vulnerable, she sold me out to my enemies. So yes, Miss Whitmore, I avoid the fountain and the rose garden and every other damn place that reminds me I was fool enough to trust someone who never deserved it. Silence fell like a stone between them. Rowan waited for the platitudes, the meaningless reassurances that his wife had surely loved him really, that there must have been a misunderstanding. Instead, Clara said simply, that must have been devastating. The unexpected empathy made his throat tighten. It was. And you never heard her explanation? She tried to give one. I didn't want to hear it. Rowan's voice went harsh. I heard enough while I was bedridden. Her voice in the hallway with Lord Marcus Thornwood, my business rival, talking about papers being signed, about how I never suspected a thing. She laughed, Miss Whitmore. While I lay broken in that bed, she laughed about deceiving me. And when you confronted her, she claimed it wasn't what I thought, that she'd been trying to help. But the evidence was clear. Thornwood had won the shipping contract I'd been negotiating for months, a contract worth millions. My solicitor confirmed that someone had leaked confidential information about my bid, someone with intimate access to my business papers. Rowan's voice dropped. Someone who slept in my bed and whispered promises in the dark. Claire's hand found his, her fingers cool and steady. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm well rid of her. Are you? The question was soft but pointed. Because from where I'm sitting, Your Grace, she still owns you. 3 years later, and you're still so consumed by what she did that you can't even walk past a fountain without falling apart. Rowan yanked his hand away. How dare you? I dare because someone has to. Clara stood abruptly. You're not grieving your wife, Your Grace. You're nursing your wounds like prizes. You're so invested in being the wronged party that you've built your entire identity around betrayal. And that's not survival. That's surrender. You know nothing about what I've survived. I know you're still breathing. I know you have a home, an estate, people who care about you despite your best efforts to drive them away. I know you're wasting all of it because holding on to anger feels safer than risking hope. Clara's voice shook slightly, the first crack in her professional composure. And I know that if you keep this up, you'll die alone in that study, still convinced you were right to push away everyone who might have proven you wrong. Get out. Rowan stood, his hands trembling. This walk is over. This entire experiment is over. I want you gone from my estate by nightfall. No, that wasn't a request. And I don't take orders from men who are too cowardly to face their own pain. Clara's voice rose to match his. You want to fire me? Fine. Do it properly. Look me in the eye and tell me to leave. The cruelty of the statement made Rowan's vision, such as it was, white out with rage. How dare you use my blindness as a weapon? I'm not using anything except the truth. Clara moved closer. He could feel her presence like heat. You hide behind that blindness, Your Grace. You use it as an excuse for everything, for your isolation, your bitterness, your refusal to engage with life. Poor Rowan Blackmoor, betrayed and broken, nothing left but darkness. It's a wonderful story. Very tragic. Completely false. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then prove me wrong. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Take my hand. Let me guide you through this garden. Show me you're stronger than your pain. Why? The question came out broken. Why do you even care? Clara's breath hitched, a tiny sound, but in his heightened awareness, Rowan caught it. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion she couldn't quite hide. Because I've seen what you're capable of, Your Grace. I've seen the man you can be when you're not drowning in bitterness, and I refuse to watch you waste that potential on a past you can't change. Something in her voice, in the raw honesty of it, pierced through Rowan's defenses. This wasn't a nurse reciting platitudes. This was someone who genuinely cared for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom. One more circuit, he said hoarsely, through the kitchen gardens, away from the fountain. Agreed. Clara's hand slipped back into his, and this time Rowan didn't pull away. But tomorrow, we try the eastern path. We'll see. Yes, Clara said softly. We will. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Rowan was in his study, attempting to review estate accounts by having Edmund read them aloud, when the butler's voice went stiff with disapproval. Your Grace, Lord Marcus Thornwood is here to see you. The name sent ice through Rowan's veins. Thornwood, the man who'd stolen his contract, his business opportunities, and, if Rowan's suspicions were correct, his wife's loyalty. Tell him I'm not receiving visitors. I'm afraid he's been quite insistent, Your Grace. He says it's a matter of some urgency regarding your shipping interests. Rowan's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. Every instinct screamed to send Thornwood away. But the man had mentioned business, and despite his isolation, Rowan wasn't fool enough to ignore potential threats to his remaining holdings. 5 minutes, he said coldly. And Edmund, you stay in the room. Of course, Your Grace. Footsteps approached, confident, unhurried. Lord Marcus Thornwood had always moved like a man who owned every room he entered. The scent of expensive cologne preceded him, sharp and cloying. Blackmoor. Thornwood's voice was jovial, as if they were old friends. It's been too long. Not long enough. State your business. Straight to the point. I always admired that about you. A chair scraped, Thornwood sitting uninvited. I'll be brief. I'm expanding my shipping operations into the Mediterranean trade routes. Your family has held those contracts for 3 generations. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer to acquire them. They're not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, Blackmoor. I'm offering £100,000 for the Mediterranean contracts and associated dock facilities. It was a staggering sum, far more than the routes were currently worth, which meant Thornwood knew something Rowan didn't. Some opportunity Rowan's isolation had caused him to miss. Still not interested. Be reasonable. Those routes require active management, regular travel, negotiations in foreign ports. You're in no condition to oversee them properly. Thornwood's voice dripped false sympathy. I'm offering you a graceful exit with full compensation. Don't let pride bankrupt what's left of your empire. My empire is none of your concern. Actually, it is. When you default on your obligations and destabilize the entire shipping industry, it becomes everyone's concern. Papers rustled. Your captains have been operating without proper oversight for 2 years. Half your ships need major repairs you haven't authorized. The dock facilities in Marseille are one bad storm away from collapse. You're bleeding money, Blackmoor, and you're too proud to admit it. Every word was a knife, made worse by being true. Rowan had been so consumed with his own misery that he'd let his business interests rot. I'll manage my own affairs. Will you, or will you hide in this study until there's nothing left to manage? Thornwood stood. I'll give you 1 week to consider. After that, the offer expires and I'll simply wait for your inevitable collapse to acquire everything at auction prices. Get out! Gladly. This place reeks of failure anyway. Thornwood's footsteps moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Blackmoor? I ran into your wife in London last month. Former wife, I should say. She's looking well. Apparently she's been doing charity work with wounded soldiers. Quite the devoted angel of mercy. Rowan's world tilted. Lydia was in London? Working with soldiers? Still pining for her, are you? Thornwood's laugh was cruel. Don't bother. She's made it quite clear she has no interest in returning to the man who threw her out like garbage. Can't say I blame her. You were always more concerned with your precious pride than the people around you. Edmund, show Lord Thornwood out. Now. Of course, Your Grace. After they left, Rowan sat in thunderous silence, Thornwood's words circling his mind like carrion birds. Lydia in London. Lydia doing charity work. Lydia apparently thriving without him. Good. That's what he'd wanted, wasn't it? For her to stay away? To leave him to his righteous anger? So why did the thought of her laughing with wounded soldiers, caring for men who weren't him, make his chest ache like a fresh wound? Your Grace? Claire's voice from the doorway made him jump. How long had she been standing there? What do you want, Miss Whitmore? Edmund said you had a visitor, Lord Thornwood. She moved into the room. I take it the meeting didn't go well? That's an understatement. He wants to buy your shipping contracts. It wasn't a question. Rowan's head snapped toward her. How did you know that? I heard him leave. He was talking quite loudly to his companion about Mediterranean routes and dock facilities. A pause. He also mentioned your wife. Former wife. And yes, apparently she's in London playing saint while my business crumbles. The bitterness in his own voice disgusted him, but he couldn't stop it. Poetic justice, I suppose. The woman who betrayed me gets to live happily ever after while I lose everything. Claire's footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. What if you're wrong? About what? About her, about the betrayal, about everything. Claire's voice was carefully controlled. What if there's another explanation for what you heard that day? There isn't. I heard them talking. I heard her laugh. You heard sounds through a doorway while drugged with laudanum and half-conscious from surgery. Clara's words were sharp. You heard fragments of conversation and constructed a narrative that confirmed your worst fears, but you never actually listened to her explanation, did you? I didn't need to. The evidence was that she was in a hallway with your business rival. That's all you actually know for certain. Clara sat in the chair Thornwood had vacated. The rest is assumption, interpretation, a story you told yourself about betrayal because it hurt less than considering alternatives. What alternatives? Rowan's voice rose. That she was innocently chatting with the man who destroyed my business prospects? That her laugh was just friendly conversation? That maybe she was trying to help you, and you never gave her the chance to explain how? Clara's voice softened. That maybe your pride destroyed something real because you were too afraid to trust. The words hit harder than Rowan wanted to admit. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Clara stood abruptly. I know what it's like to love someone who can't see past their own wounds. I know what it's like to try to help and be pushed away. I know what it's like to watch someone choose bitterness over truth. This isn't about you, isn't it? You said yourself I seem familiar, that I know this house too well, that my voice sounds like someone you used to know. Clara's voice trembled. Maybe you should ask yourself why that is, Your Grace. Maybe you should consider that the stranger caring for you isn't a stranger at all. Rowan froze. The implication in her words, the rawness in her voice, the way she'd known about the raspberry preserves and the fountain and every detail of his life. No! He shook his head violently. No, that's impossible. Lydia left. She's in London. Thornwood just said, Thornwood lies, Your Grace. That's what he does. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper now. He lied to you 3 years ago, and he's lying to you now. The question is whether you're finally ready to hear the truth. If you're suggesting, if you're claiming, Rowan couldn't finish the sentence. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Show me your face. You can't see. Then let me touch it. Let me... His hands were shaking as he stood. If you are who I think you're implying, if this is some kind of sick game... It's not a game, Clara's voice broke. It was never a game, Rowan. I came back because despite everything you did, despite every cruel word and accusation, I never stopped. A crash from the hallway made them both jump. Edmund's voice rang out, sharp with alarm. Lord Thornwood, you cannot go back there. His Grace said, His Grace can go to hell. Thornwood's voice, angry now. I left my walking stick, and I'm not leaving without it. Clara gasped. He'll see me. He can't. Rowan, I have to go. But Rowan's hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising accuracy. No, you stay. You tell me the truth, right now. I can't. Not like this. Not with him. The door burst open. Thornwood's cologne flooded the room again, along with Edmund's frantic apologies. My apologies, Blackmoor. I left my... Thornwood stopped abruptly. Well, who do we have here? Rowan felt Clara try to pull away, but he held firm. A nurse. She's none of your concern. A nurse? Thornwood's voice went sharp with interest. How curious. She looks remarkably like, but no, that couldn't be. Could it, my dear? Get out, Thornwood. Rowan's voice was deadly quiet. Now. In a moment. I'm simply trying to place this woman's face. It's so familiar, and yet... Footsteps moved closer. Miss, do I know you from somewhere? No. Clara's voice was firm, despite the tremor Rowan could feel in her wrist. We've never met. Are you certain? Because I could swear I've seen those eyes before. That particular shade of green is quite distinctive. In fact, the late Duchess Blackmoor had eyes exactly... Out! Rowan roared. Edmund, throw him out bodily if necessary. Now, no need for violence. I was just leaving. Thornwood's retreat was leisurely, deliberately provocative. But Blackmoor, do take care. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones with the most to hide. I learned that lesson the hard way. Apparently, you're still learning it. The door finally closed. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Rowan's hand was still locked around Clara's wrist. He could feel her pulse hammering beneath his fingers. Tell me, he said hoarsely. Tell me who you are. I'm Clara Whitmore, your nurse. Liar. Rowan, tell me the truth. The explosion of rage surprised even him. If you're her, If you're Lydia, if this whole thing has been some elaborate deception. It wasn't deception. Clara's voice was thick with tears now. It was survival. It was the only way I could get close enough to help you without you throwing me out on sight. It was... She stopped, and in that silence, Rowan heard everything she wasn't saying. The lavender scent, the intimate knowledge of his house, his preferences, his life. The way she moved through spaces like she owned them. The pain in her voice when she talked about loving someone who pushed her away. "It was you," he whispered, "all along. You came back." "Yes." The word was barely audible. "Why?" "Because you were destroying yourself. Because someone had to stop you before there was nothing left to save." Clara's voice broke completely. "Because despite everything you said, everything you did, I couldn't stop loving you long enough to let you die alone in the dark." Rowan released her wrist like it burned him. "Get out! Rowan, please! Get out!" He was shaking, his entire world fracturing. "You lied to me. For weeks, you lied to my face." "I never lied about anything that mattered. I never pretended to care less than I did. I only hid my name so you'd give me a chance to prove..." "You proved nothing except that I can't trust anyone. Not even the woman I once loved." Rowan turned away, blindly seeking the support of his desk. "You're fired, Lydia. Clara, whoever the hell you are. I want you gone within the hour." "I'm not leaving. Then I'll have Edmund throw you out." "He won't." Lydia's voice steadied, grew stronger. "Because he knows the truth. Hartley knows. Half the staff knows. They all agreed to help me because they could see what I saw, that you were dying by inches and someone had to intervene." "Conspiracy." The word tasted like poison. "Everyone lying to me. Everyone manipulating. Everyone caring about you more than you care about yourself," Lydia shouted back. "You self-righteous, stubborn, impossible man. Do you have any idea what it cost me to come back here? To watch you grieve for me while I stood 3 feet away? To hear you talk about how I betrayed you when I sacrificed everything to save you? You didn't save me. You destroyed me. I saved your fortune." The words echoed through the study like cannon fire. "That conversation you overheard? That was me finalizing the deal that kept you from bankruptcy. Thornwood wasn't stealing your contract. He was buying your debts. I sold my inheritance, every penny I had, to pay him off before he could foreclose on Blackmoor Estate. That laugh you heard? That was me breaking down in relief that I'd succeeded before you lost everything." Rowan stood frozen, the words not quite computing. "That's not... You're lying, am I? Then explain why you still own this estate, Rowan. Explain why the bank didn't seize everything when you couldn't make payments for 6 months after the accident. Explain why Thornwood let the shipping contract go despite being positioned to take it all." "He didn't let it go, he won it. He won a smaller contract in exchange for forgiving your debts. That was the deal I negotiated. Smaller losses for you, enough profit for him to save face." Lydia's voice shook. "I gave up my family's money, my own security, everything, and you repaid me by assuming the worst and throwing me out without a hearing." "You could have told me." "I tried." The raw pain in her voice made Rowan flinch. "You wouldn't listen. You were so convinced I'd betrayed you that nothing I said mattered. You'd already made up your mind, already written the story where I was the villain, and you were so invested in being right that you didn't care whether it was true." The room spun. Rowan groped for his chair, barely finding it before his legs gave out. "Why didn't you fight harder? Why did you just leave?" "Because you made it clear you'd rather lose everything than trust me, and I couldn't force you to believe in something you were determined to destroy." Lydia's footsteps moved toward the door. "I left because staying would have killed me, but I came back because leaving was killing you." "Wait," the word escaped before Rowan could stop it. "Don't go." "Why not? You just fired me." Rowan's throat closed. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That wouldn't cover 3 years of wrongful accusation? That he wanted her to stay? He'd forfeited that right when he threw her out. "I need time. To think. To process." "Take all the time you need, Your Grace." Her voice had gone cold, formal. "But understand this. I'm not leaving this estate. You hired me for 3 months, and I'm staying 3 months whether you speak to me or not, whether you believe me or not, whether you forgive me or not." Forgive you? The absurdity made him laugh, a broken sound. Lydia, if what you're saying is true, it is true. Every word. And when you're ready to hear the whole story, when you're ready to actually listen instead of assuming, I'll tell you everything. The door opened. But until then, Your Grace, you'll have to live with the same uncertainty you forced on me 3 years ago. The same doubt. The same pain of loving someone who refuses to see you. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. Rowan sat in the wreckage of his certainty, his hands gripping the armrest so hard the wood creaked. 3 years. 3 years of righteous anger, of nursing his wounds, of building a fortress of bitterness around his broken heart. And if Lydia was telling the truth, if she'd actually saved him, sacrificed for him, loved him even when he destroyed her, then Rowan Blackmoor wasn't the wronged party in this story. He was the villain. The realization hit like a physical blow, stealing his breath. He'd spent 3 years convinced of his victimhood, so certain of betrayal that he'd never questioned his own assumptions. He'd taken fragments of overheard conversation, filtered them through fear and pain, and constructed a narrative that justified his anger, and he'd destroyed his marriage based on a lie he'd told himself. What have I done? The whisper escaped into empty air. No one answered. But somewhere in this house, the woman he'd loved and lost and found again was probably crying. And for the first time in 3 years, Rowan understood that those tears were his fault. Not hers. His. The darkness pressed in, heavy with truth he could no longer deny. And in that darkness, Rowan began to understand that being blind to the world around him was nothing compared to being blind to his own heart. The darkness pressed in, heavy with truth he could no longer deny. And in that darkness, Rowan began to understand that being blind to the world around him was nothing compared to being blind to his own heart. For 3 days, he didn't leave his study. Edmund brought meals that went untouched. Hartley knocked repeatedly, begging for meetings about urgent estate matters. The servants whispered in corners, their concern palpable even through closed doors. But Rowan sat motionless in his chair, replaying every moment since Clara, Lydia, had walked into his life. The signs had been there from the beginning. The way she moved through rooms with unconscious familiarity. The raspberry preserves. The lavender scent that had haunted him. Even her voice, when he allowed himself to truly remember, carried the same cadence as the woman he'd married. He'd been so desperate to keep her memory buried that he'd missed her resurrection right in front of him. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. Your Grace, Edmund ventured carefully. This came by special courier from London. The seal is from Dr. William Ashford. Rowan's head snapped up. Ashford was the premier eye surgeon in England, a specialist who'd written several papers on vision restoration techniques. Rowan had consulted him once, 2 years ago, only to be told his case was hopeless. Read it. Edmund broke the seal, and his voice took on the formal tone he used for official correspondence. Your Grace, I write with news that may interest you. Recent advances in surgical procedures for traumatic vision loss have yielded remarkable results. I have successfully restored partial or full sight to 3 patients whose injuries were similar to yours. If you are willing, I would like to examine you again. The procedure carries risks, but the potential rewards are significant. I await your response at your earliest convenience. The words hung in the air like a miracle Rowan didn't deserve. Shall I draft a response, Your Grace? No. Rowan's voice was hoarse from disuse. Where is she? Where is Lydia? Her Grace is in the garden, Your Grace. She's been working with the groundskeeper to restore the rose beds. Of course she had. While he'd hidden from the truth, she'd been rebuilding the places they'd once loved together. Tell her I need to speak with her. And Edmund? Rowan paused. Tell her I'm ready to listen. The minutes crawled past like hours. Rowan heard her approach. Those same confident footsteps that had guided him through darkness, that had belonged to both Clara and Lydia all along. The study door opened, closed. The scent of lavender and earth filled the space between them. You wanted to see me, Your Grace. Her voice was carefully neutral, stripped of the warmth she'd shown as Clara. Don't. The word came out rougher than he intended. Don't call me that. Not like that. Not like I'm a stranger. Aren't you? Bitterness edged her tone. 3 years ago, you made it very clear I was nothing to you. That hasn't changed. It has. Rowan stood, his hands gripping the desk for support. Lydia, everything you said about the debt, about saving the estate, I need to know if it's true. Why? So you can decide whether to believe me this time? She laughed, a broken sound. I already told you the truth, Rowan. What I need now is evidence to convince you I'm not a liar. I need to understand, please. The plea cost him everything. Help me understand what happened that day, all of it. Silence stretched between them. Then Lydia crossed to the window, her footsteps slow. Do you remember the weeks before the accident? How worried you were about the shipping contract? Yes, it was worth millions, the foundation of our expansion into Mediterranean trade. You were so focused on winning it that you didn't see what was happening behind the scenes. Thornwood wasn't just competing for the contract, he was systematically buying up your debts. Small creditors, outstanding loans, promissory notes you'd forgotten about. He was building leverage. Rowan's stomach turned. How do you know this? Because I found the records in your study. You'd been so secretive about your business troubles, trying to protect me from worry, but I knew something was wrong. The way you'd wake up at night, the constant meetings with your solicitor. So I searched until I found the truth. Her voice wavered. You were drowning, Rowan. One more setback and Thornwood could have foreclosed on everything. And you went to him. Not a question, a statement of fact that suddenly made terrible sense. I went to him because I had something he wanted more than your estate. My family's shipping connections in Italy. My father had built relationships there over decades. Thornwood needed those connections to make the Mediterranean expansion profitable. She paused. So I made a deal. My inheritance, my family's goodwill, and the smaller shipping contract in exchange for forgiving your debts. You sacrificed your entire legacy to save mine. I sacrificed money to save my husband. There's a difference. Her voice hardened. But you were too proud to see it. When you overheard me talking to Thornwood about the papers being signed, I was finalizing the debt forgiveness. When I laughed, it was relief so intense it came out broken. I'd saved you, Rowan, and you repaid me by assuming the worst. The truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. Every assumption he'd made, every bitter thought he'd nursed for 3 years, all of it built on misunderstanding and wounded pride. Why didn't you tell me before the accident? His voice was barely a whisper. I tried, but you were so consumed with the contract negotiations you barely heard me when I spoke, and I wanted to present you with a solution, not just another problem. She turned from the window. I thought if I could save everything, you'd never have to know how close we'd come to losing it all. I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I convinced myself you'd destroyed me. Yes, the single word held years of pain, and when I tried to explain after the accident, you wouldn't listen. You'd already decided I was guilty. Nothing I said would have changed your mind. Rowan sank back into his chair, the weight of his mistakes crushing him. I was so certain. The evidence seemed so clear. Evidence filtered through pain and fear and laudanum. Lydia's footsteps approached. You constructed a narrative that made sense of your suffering, Rowan. It's what we do when the truth is too complicated to bear, but it doesn't make the narrative true. I destroyed us based on a lie I told myself. Yes. No mercy in that admission, just truth. You did. The silence that followed was heavy with recrimination and regret. Finally, Rowan forced himself to ask the question that had haunted him since her revelation. Why did you come back? After everything I did, why would you? Because you're still my husband. Because I made vows that meant something to me, even if they didn't to you. Because, her voice broke. Because I never stopped loving you, even when I desperately wanted to. The confession hit him like a physical blow. After 3 years of abandonment, of cruel accusations, of absolute rejection, she still loved him. He didn't deserve it, didn't deserve her, didn't deserve anything but the darkness he'd wrapped around himself like armor. Dr. Ashford wrote, he said abruptly. He thinks he can restore my sight. Lydia's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the implications. When? I haven't responded yet. I wanted... He stopped, unsure how to articulate the tangled mess of his feelings. If I can see again, I want you there. When the bandages come off, I want to see you. Why? Suspicion sharpened her tone. So you can finally confirm I'm really the same woman you threw away? So you can put a face to your guilt? Because if there's any chance I can fix what I broke, I need to start by seeing you clearly. Rowan stood, moving toward her voice with more confidence than he felt. I've been blind to the truth for 3 years, Lydia. Maybe if I can see with my eyes, I'll finally stop being blind to everything that matters. And if the surgery fails, then I'll spend the rest of my life making amends in darkness. Either way, I'm done hiding. His hand found hers, and he was surprised when she didn't pull away. I won't ask you to forgive me. I have no right. But I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be better than the man who destroyed us. Lydia's fingers tightened around his. One condition. Anything. If your sight returns, if you can finally see me, you have to promise you'll see all of it. Not just the woman standing in front of you, but everything I did, everything I sacrificed, everything you refused to believe. Her voice turned fierce. No more convenient narratives, no more assumptions, just truth, however complicated and painful it is. I promise. She pulled her hand away. Then write to Dr. Ashford. Tell him you're ready. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later in London. The intervening time passed in a strange limbo. Lydia, she'd insisted he stop calling her Clara, maintained a professional distance that made Rowan's chest ache. She still guided him through daily routines, still managed the household with quiet efficiency. But the warmth she'd shown as Clara was gone, replaced by cool courtesy that hurt more than anger would have. Rowan threw himself into estate business with a fervor that surprised everyone. He demanded detailed reports on every aspect of Blackmoor's operations. He dictated letters to tenants he hadn't contacted in years. He even agreed to a meeting with his board of directors, the first in 18 months. You're preparing for battle, Hartley observed during one particularly grueling session reviewing accounts. Why? Because Thornwood was right about one thing. I've been letting everything crumble while I nursed my wounds. Rowan signed another document with Edmund's guidance. That ends now. If I'm going to have a future worth seeing, I need to rebuild what I've destroyed. And Her Grace? Rowan's pen stilled. What about her? She's been living in the East Wing since the truth came out. Separate quarters, minimal interaction with you outside necessary tasks. The staff is concerned. The staff should mind their own business. The staff cares about both of you, Your Grace. They remember how you were together before the accident. They want a fairy tale ending. Life doesn't work that way, Hartley. Rowan set down the pen with deliberate care. I spent 3 years convincing Lydia she meant nothing to me. I can't expect her to forget that because I finally pulled my head out of my... A commotion from the hallway cut him off. Raised voices, one of them distinctly Thornwood's, the other belonging to Edmund. I don't care if he's in a meeting. This concerns his wife, and he'll damn well see me now. The study door burst open. Thornwood's cologne flooded the room, along with something else, the sharp smell of alcohol. Blackmoor, we need to talk. About your charming wife. Rowan stood slowly. You're drunk, Thornwood, and you're trespassing. Leave before I have you thrown out. Not until you hear what I have to say. Thornwood's footsteps were unsteady. Did you know your devoted Duchess has been making inquiries in London? Asking questions about me, about my business dealings, about certain transactions from 3 years ago? Ice flooded Rowan's veins. What are you talking about? She's been digging, Blackmoor, looking for evidence that our little arrangement wasn't quite as charitable as she claimed. Thornwood laughed, a harsh sound. Seems the Duchess has trust issues, can't imagine why. Get to the point. The point is that your wife is playing a dangerous game. There are things about that debt forgiveness deal she doesn't want you to know. Things that would make you question whether her motives were quite as pure as she claims. You're lying. Am I? Then ask her why she's been meeting with my former solicitor. Ask her about the clause in our agreement that required her to... Enough! Rowan's roar shook the windows. Whatever poison you're trying to spread, it won't work. I know the truth about what Lydia did. I know she saved me, and nothing you say will change that. How touching. The blind man finally sees, Thornwood's voice dripped sarcasm. But you're still missing the bigger picture, Blackmoor. Your wife didn't just sacrifice her inheritance. She signed a contract that gave me permanent leverage over certain Blackmoor business interests. Leverage I can call in anytime I want. The room tilted. What leverage? Ask her yourself. If she's been so honest about everything else, surely she won't mind explaining the fine print. Thornwood's footsteps moved toward the door. Oh, and Blackmoor? I hear you're having surgery next month. How convenient. Just in time to watch your world fall apart in full color. The door slammed. Silence fell like a shroud. Your Grace, Hartley ventured carefully. He's clearly trying to drive a wedge between you and Her Grace. You shouldn't... Find Lydia. Now! Rowan's voice was ice. Bring her here immediately. But Your Grace, now, Hartley. 20 minutes later, Lydia entered the study. Rowan could hear the tension in her breathing, the careful way she closed the door. You wanted to see me. Thornwood was just here. He made some interesting claims about our agreement. Rowan kept his voice level through sheer force of will. He said you signed a contract that gave him permanent leverage over Blackmoor business interests. Is that true? The pause before she answered told him everything. It's more complicated than yes or no, Lydia. Did you sign a contract giving Thornwood leverage over my business? Yes. The word fell like a stone. But not the way he's making it sound. What leverage? What exactly did you promise him? Right of first refusal on any Mediterranean shipping expansions. If you ever tried to re-enter those markets, Thornwood would have the option to buy into the venture as a partner. She spoke quickly, defensively. It was the only way to get him to forgive the debts. He wanted insurance that you wouldn't immediately compete against him after I'd used family connections to help his expansion. You gave him veto power over my business decisions, without telling me. I gave him a limited clause in a contract you would never have needed if you'd managed your affairs properly. Anger flashed in her voice. You were too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to see you were drowning. I did what was necessary to save everything you'd built, and yes, it came with strings attached. That's how negotiation works. That's how betrayal works. The words escaped before Rowan could stop them. The silence that followed was absolute. When Lydia finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. After everything, after I came back, after I cared for you, after I explained what really happened, you still think I betrayed you. You lied about the full terms of the agreement. You let me believe you'd simply sacrificed your inheritance when the truth is you bound my business future to my worst enemy. Rowan's hands clenched. How is that different from the betrayal I accused you of 3 years ago? Because 3 years ago I did it to save you, and you repaid me by throwing me out like garbage. Lydia's voice shook. I came back because I hoped you might finally see past your wounded pride. But you can't, can you? You'll always find a reason to cast me as the villain because that's easier than admitting you were wrong. I admitted I was wrong. No, you admitted you misunderstood the conversation you overheard. That's not the same as admitting your fundamental failure, that you never trusted me. Not really. Not enough to believe in me when it mattered. She moved toward the door. I'm done, Rowan. I came back to help you, to save you from yourself one more time. But I can't fix someone who's determined to stay broken. Where are you going? Away, London, anywhere that isn't here. The door opened. Good luck with your surgery, Your Grace. I hope you finally learn to see clearly. Lydia, wait. But she was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway like a countdown to something Rowan couldn't name. He stood frozen, the pattern repeating itself with terrible symmetry. 3 years ago, he'd driven her away with accusations. Now he'd done it again, his pride and suspicion destroying what fragile peace they'd built. The difference was that this time he knew the truth, and it was so much worse. The next morning, Rowan woke to chaos. Your Grace! Edmund's voice was panicked, unusual for the normally composed butler. Your Grace, you must wake up! What is it? Rowan struggled upright, disoriented. It's Her Grace. She's collapsed. The doctor is with her now, but he says... Edmund's voice broke. He says it's serious, Your Grace, very serious. The world stopped. What happened? She was in the garden early this morning, directing the workers. She suddenly fell unconscious. We brought her to her chambers, but she won't wake up. Edmund's hand gripped Rowan's shoulder. The doctor thinks it might be brain fever or some kind of seizure. He's not sure. Rowan was moving before conscious thought kicked in, Edmund guiding him through the hallways he'd learned to navigate. They reached Lydia's chambers in minutes that felt like hours. The room smelled of sickness, sharp medicinal odors, and something sweeter, more ominous. Doctor. Pembroke's voice was grave as he addressed someone, probably Hartley. Her pulse is weak and erratic, temperature dangerously high. Without knowing what caused the collapse, I can only treat symptoms. What are her chances? Hartley asked quietly. Poor. Very poor, I'm afraid. No. The word escaped Rowan before he could stop it. No, that's not acceptable. There must be something. Your Grace. Dr. Pembroke's hand on his arm. I'm doing everything I can, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that Her Grace may not recover. Rowan pulled away, stumbling toward the bed. His hands found the footboard, then traced up until he felt the edge of the mattress. Lydia's hand was there, small and burning hot beneath his fingers. Everyone out, he said hoarsely. Please, just give me a moment alone with her. They left reluctantly, the door clicking shut with terrible finality. Rowan sank to his knees beside the bed, Lydia's hand clutched in both of his. 3 years. 3 years wasted on pride and anger and willful blindness. And now, when he'd finally begun to see the truth, when he was so close to literally seeing her face again. Don't you dare, he whispered fiercely. Don't you dare leave me now. Not like this. Not when I finally understand what I threw away. She didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Each breath sounded like it might be her last. I'm sorry. The words poured out like blood from a wound. For everything. For not listening 3 years ago. For accusing you yesterday. For every moment I chose pride over you. I'm so sorry, Lydia. Please, please don't go. Still nothing. Just that terrible, fragile breathing. Rowan pressed his forehead to their joined hands, tears streaming down his face for the first time since the accident. He'd spent 3 years refusing to cry, convinced that showing emotion meant weakness. Now he wept openly, desperately, for the woman he'd loved and lost and finally found again, only to lose her once more to his own stupidity. Hours passed. Day faded to evening, though Rowan only knew by the changing sounds outside the window. Staff brought food he didn't eat, updates he barely heard. Dr. Pembroke checked on Lydia periodically, his increasingly grave demeanor telling Rowan everything his words didn't. She was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do. Sometime near midnight, Rowan felt a change. Lydia's breathing shifted, became more labored, more desperate. He fumbled for the bell pull, yanking it hard enough to nearly tear it from the wall. Dr. Pembroke arrived within minutes. Her lungs are filling with fluid. This is... Your Grace, this may be the end. No! Rowan refused to let go of her hand. There has to be something. I'm sorry. I truly am. Dr. Pembroke's voice held genuine regret. Would you like me to send for a priest? The suggestion was like a knife between his ribs. Last rites, final prayers, the acknowledgement that hope was gone. No. Rowan's voice was steady despite the tears still streaming down his face. No priests. If she's going to, if this is, I want to be the last voice she hears, not some stranger reciting prayers. Dr. Pembroke withdrew quietly. Rowan leaned closer, his lips near Lydia's ear. I love you, he whispered. I never stopped. Even when I convinced myself I hated you, even when I was drowning in bitterness, some part of me never stopped loving you. I was just too afraid to admit it. Her breathing stuttered, weakened. Each pause between breaths stretched longer. If you can hear me, if any part of you is still there, I need you to know the truth. You were right about everything. I was a coward hiding behind wounded pride. I was so afraid of being vulnerable that I destroyed the one person who truly saw me. His voice broke completely. And I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry that my last words to you were accusations instead of the truth. That I wasted our second chance the same way I wasted the first. Silence. Just the fading sound of her breathing, growing shallower with each passing second. Please, Rowan begged. Please don't leave me. Not now. Not when I finally understand what I had. The breathing stopped. For one eternal moment, the world held its breath with her. Then, a violent cough. Lydia's body convulsed, her hand clenching around his hard enough to hurt. She gasped, a desperate inhale that sounded like resurrection. And then she was breathing again, ragged, painful, but definitely breathing. "Dr. Pembroke!" Rowan shouted. "Doctor, she's—" The door burst open. Footsteps rushed to the bedside. The doctor's hands pushed Rowan aside as he examined Lydia with frantic efficiency. "Extraordinary," he muttered. "The fever's breaking. Pulse is strengthening. She's— Your Grace, I think she's going to survive." Rowan sagged against the wall, his legs giving out. Relief so intense it felt like physical pain crashed through him. She was alive. Against all odds, all expectations, Lydia was alive. "She'll need constant monitoring for the next 24 hours, Dr. Pembroke continued. "The crisis may return, but for now, she's stabilized. I'm not leaving her side." "I wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise, Your Grace." The doctor's voice held warmth. "Your dedication may have made the difference. Sometimes the will to live needs a reason. I suspect you gave her one." After the doctor left, Rowan reclaimed his position beside the bed. Lydia's hand was cooler now, her breathing steadier. The terrible urgency had passed, leaving behind exhaustion and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd been given one more chance. "I meant it," he whispered into the darkness. "Every word. I love you, Lydia Blackmoor. And if you wake up, if we survive this, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Her fingers twitched in his, so slight he might have imagined it. But Rowan chose to believe. For the first time in 3 years, he chose hope over bitterness, faith over fear. And in the quiet darkness of that sick room, with Lydia's hand warm in his and her breathing steady in the silence, Rowan Blackmoor finally began to truly see, not with his eyes, but with his heart. The question was whether it was already too late. Dawn broke gray and cold through Lydia's chamber windows. Rowan hadn't moved from her bedside in 12 hours, his hand still wrapped around hers, his body aching from the vigil. But he felt every moment of discomfort like penance, small payments on a debt he could never fully repay. "Your Grace," Dr. Pembroke's voice was gentle as he entered for his morning examination. "You should rest. I can have someone sit with Her Grace while you—" "I'm not leaving." The doctor didn't argue. He checked Lydia's pulse, her breathing, the color of her skin. Each assessment brought a small nod of satisfaction. "The fever remains broken. Her vital signs continue to strengthen. I believe the worst has passed." "When will she wake?" "That I cannot say. The body heals at its own pace. It could be hours or days." Dr. Pembroke packed his instruments with practiced efficiency. "But Your Grace, there's something you should know. Before the collapse, Her Grace was exhibiting signs of extreme exhaustion. According to the household staff, she'd barely slept since returning to Blackmoor. She was working herself to the bone, managing the estate, overseeing renovations, caring for you despite your difficulties." Guilt twisted in Rowan's chest. "You're saying I caused this." "I'm saying Her Grace was carrying burdens she shouldn't have borne alone. The collapse was likely her body's way of forcing the rest she refused to give herself." The doctor's hand rested briefly on Rowan's shoulder. "When she wakes, she'll need more than medical care. She'll need reasons to take better care of herself. Perhaps you might provide those reasons, Your Grace." After he left, Rowan sat in the weighted silence. Lydia had come back to save him, and he'd repaid her with accusations and rejection. She'd pushed herself to exhaustion trying to rebuild what he'd broken, and he'd been too blind, literally and figuratively, to see it. "I was a fool," he whispered to her unconscious form. "I know that doesn't mean much now. But I need you to know I understand, finally, completely. And if you wake up, when you wake up, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I've learned." Her hand twitched again. Stronger this time, deliberate. Rowan's breath caught. "Lydia, can you hear me?" A soft moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Then, slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. "Rowan?" Her voice was barely audible, raw from illness. "I'm here." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I'm right here. The garden? She tried to sit up, immediately falling back with a gasp of pain. Don't move. You collapsed yesterday. Brain fever, the doctor thinks. You've been unconscious for over 12 hours. Confusion clouded her features. I don't remember. I was directing the workers, and then you pushed yourself too hard because you've been carrying the weight of this entire estate on your shoulders. Rowan's voice cracked. Because I was too wrapped up in my own misery to help, too quick to accuse instead of trust. Lydia's eyes focused on him more clearly. You stayed with me. Of course I stayed. Did you think I'd... He stopped, the bitter irony hitting him. Yes. I suppose you did think I'd leave. I've given you every reason to expect abandonment. Rowan, let me finish, please. He drew a shaking breath. Last night, when Dr. Pembroke said you were dying, I realized something. I've spent 3 years convinced you betrayed me, then a few weeks thinking I'd forgiven you, and yesterday angry all over again about terms you negotiated to save my life. But the truth is simpler and more terrible than any of that. What truth? That I never learned to trust you. Not really. I loved you. I still love you, but love without trust is just possession. And I treated you like a possession I could throw away when you didn't meet my expectations. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Lydia. For 3 years ago. For yesterday. For every moment in between when I chose my wounded pride over the woman who sacrificed everything for me. Tears slipped down Lydia's cheeks. I bound your business to Thornwood without telling you. You had a right to be angry about that. I had a right to ask questions, to seek understanding. I didn't have a right to immediately assume betrayal. Rowan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. You made a hard choice in an impossible situation. You did what you thought necessary to save me. And instead of trusting that your intentions were good, I reverted to the same pattern that destroyed us 3 years ago. You're not entirely wrong, though. Lydia's voice was weak but steady. I should have told you about the contract clause before you found out from Thornwood. I was afraid you'd see it as another betrayal, so I hid it, which made it worse. Why were you meeting with Thornwood's solicitor? Lydia's eyes widened slightly. How did you Thornwood mentioned it before you collapsed. Rowan squeezed her hand gently. I'm asking now instead of assuming. What were you investigating? A long pause. Then Lydia sighed. I wanted to find a way out of the contract. The leverage clause was necessary 3 years ago, but I thought if I could find evidence of fraud or coercion in how Thornwood structured the original debt, I might be able to invalidate the agreement. I was trying to free you from it completely. You were trying to fix the one thing you thought I couldn't forgive. Yes. She met his unseeing gaze directly. I knew the clause bothered you. I knew it would always stand between us like proof that I'd controlled your life without permission. So I was trying to undo it. The revelation hit Rowan like a physical blow. While he'd been nursing his anger, she'd been working to eliminate the very thing he resented. Did you find anything? No. Thornwood's solicitor was meticulous. The contract is legally sound. Bitterness crept into her voice. I failed. Again. You didn't fail. You fought for us when I'd given up. You came back when any rational person would have stayed away. You cared for me despite everything I'd done. Rowan lifted her hand to his cheek, letting her feel the tears there. The only failure here is mine, Lydia. And I need you to know, I need you to believe that I'm done failing you. What does that mean? It means when Dr. Ashford performs the surgery, when I can finally see again, the first thing I want to look at is your face. Not to confirm you're who you say you are, but because I've been blind to you for too long and I can't waste another moment. Lydia's breath hitched. Rowan, the surgery might not work. Then I'll spend the rest of my life in darkness loving you the way I should have from the beginning. With trust, with partnership, with the absolute certainty that you are the strongest, most courageous person I've ever known. She was crying openly now. I don't know if I can do this again. If I can rebuild everything just to have you, I won't destroy it this time. I swear on everything I have left. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. I can't undo the past. But I can give you a different future, if you'll let me try. I'm so tired, Rowan. The admission was barely audible. I'm tired of fighting alone, tired of loving someone who keeps pushing me away. Then stop fighting alone. Let me carry some of it. Let me prove I can be the partner you deserved 3 years ago. Lydia's hand came up to cup his face, her touch achingly gentle. If I do this, if I give you another chance, you have to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets between us. No more assumptions or jumping to conclusions. When you're hurt or angry or scared, you talk to me instead of shutting me out. Her voice strengthened. And if you ever dismiss me or my judgment again, I walk away and I don't come back. I can't survive another round of this, Rowan. My heart can't take it. The ultimatum should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like salvation, clear boundaries, honest expectations, the foundation for something real. I promise. Complete honesty, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Then we can try. She closed her eyes, exhaustion winning over emotion. But slowly, one day at a time. One day at a time, Rowan echoed. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then another to her lips, gentle, reverent, full of promises he intended to keep. Sleep now. I'll be here when you wake. You need rest too. I'll rest when I know you're safe. Lydia's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. Stubborn man? Stubborn woman. But the words were fond, almost playful. For the first time in 3 years, something like hope flickered between them. Lydia drifted back to sleep with her hand still in his, her breathing deep and steady. Rowan remained at her bedside, watching over her with a devotion he should have shown from the beginning. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, their future, was still unwritten, and Rowan was done letting fear write the story. 3 days later, Lydia was strong enough to leave her bed. A week after that, she was back to managing the household, though Rowan, true to his word, shouldered half the burden. They reviewed estate accounts together, made decisions about renovations as partners. Slowly, carefully, they began learning how to function as a team instead of adversaries. But Thornwood's shadow still loomed over everything. The Mediterranean contract comes up for renewal in 6 months, Hartley explained during a tense meeting in Rowan's study. Lydia sat beside him, her presence both comfort and reminder. If you want to expand back into those routes, you'll need to negotiate with Thornwood first. The leverage clause gives him right of first refusal on any partnership. Can we operate without Mediterranean expansion? Rowan asked. In the short term, yes. Long term, you'll fall behind competitors who have access to those markets, particularly with the Suez Canal opening next year. Mediterranean routes will become even more valuable. Rowan's jaw tightened. The canal project had been in development for years, a massive engineering feat that would transform global shipping. Missing that opportunity would cripple Blackmoor's future prospects. So our choices are: partner with Thornwood and give him permanent influence over our business, or abandon Mediterranean trade entirely. He didn't bother hiding his bitterness. Wonderful options. There might be a third option. Lydia's voice was quiet but firm. What if we approach the contract from a different angle entirely? What do you mean? Thornwood's leverage only applies to Mediterranean shipping expansions. It says nothing about Mediterranean imports, warehousing, or distribution networks. Lydia leaned forward. What if instead of competing with Thornwood for shipping routes, we became the primary distributor for goods arriving from Mediterranean ports? We'd need warehouse facilities, transportation networks, relationships with merchants, but we wouldn't be directly operating ships in those waters. Hartley's eyes widened. That's actually brilliant. The contract's language is very specific about shipping operations. Distribution would fall outside that scope entirely. And it would make us valuable to Thornwood rather than threatening, Lydia continued, warming to the idea. His ships need somewhere to deliver their cargo. If we control the best distribution infrastructure in England, he'd be incentivized to work with us rather than against us. Rowan felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, not just hope, but admiration. This was the woman he'd married, the strategic thinker who saw solutions where others saw only obstacles. You've been planning this. I've been thinking about it since before I collapsed, but I wanted to research the logistics before suggesting it. She paused. I should have told you sooner. I promised no more secrets. You were sick, and you're telling me now. Rowan reached for her hand, finding it easily. He'd been practicing his spatial awareness with religious dedication. That's what matters. Hartley cleared his throat diplomatically. I'll begin researching warehouse facilities and distribution costs. If we're serious about this approach, we'll need to move quickly. The canal opening creates a limited window of opportunity. Do it. And Hartley? Rowan squeezed Lydia's hand. Run everything past Her Grace as well. She's not just my wife, she's a full partner in this business now. Any decisions get made together. After Hartley left, Lydia turned to Rowan with something like wonder in her voice. You really meant that, about partnership. Every word. Your strategic instincts are better than mine, Lydia. They always have been. I was just too proud to admit it. I'm not always right. Neither am I. So we'll make mistakes together and fix them together. He pulled her closer, relishing the simple fact that she allowed it. That's what partners do. She rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust that meant more than any words. The surgery is in 2 weeks. I know. Are you frightened? Rowan considered the question honestly. Terrified. Not of the procedure itself, but of what comes after. What if my sight returns and I see how much damage I've done? What if I look at you and can't bear the pain in your eyes? What if you look at me and see someone who chose to stay despite everything? Lydia's voice was soft. What if you see partnership instead of damage? Hope instead of pain? Is that what you want me to see? I want you to see the truth, whatever that is. She lifted her head, and though Rowan couldn't see her expression, he heard the sincerity in her tone. We're not perfect, Rowan. We're two people who hurt each other badly and are trying to build something better from the wreckage. That's messy and complicated and probably always will be. But it's real, and I'd rather have complicated truth than easy fantasy. Even if the truth includes my failures? Especially then, because acknowledging failures is how we avoid repeating them. Her hand came up to touch his face, tracing features he knew were ravaged by 3 years of bitterness and isolation. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be honest and present and willing to fight for us. Can you do that? Yes. No hesitation. I can. I will. Then that's enough. She kissed him gently, a seal on the promise. Everything else we'll figure out together. The letter from Dr. Ashford's office arrived the next morning, confirming the surgery date and location. Rowan and Lydia would travel to London in 10 days, stay at the townhouse the Blackmoor family maintained there, and report to Ashford's surgical facility the following morning. We should host a dinner before we leave, Lydia suggested over breakfast. Invite the board of directors, key business partners, some of the local gentry. It's been 3 years since you've appeared in public, Rowan. People need to see that the Duke of Blackmoor is back. The suggestion made Rowan's stomach clench. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of scrutiny. You're ready. You've been managing estate business brilliantly, making decisions with confidence. The only thing holding you back is fear of judgment. Lydia's voice was gentle but firm. And besides, I'll be there. We'll face them together. The idea of appearing before London society as a blind man, with the wife he'd publicly banished now restored to his side, the gossip would be vicious, the whispers endless. Everyone would know how badly he'd failed, but hiding from judgment had cost him 3 years of his life. Maybe it was time to stop running. All right, one dinner, small gathering, trusted people only. I'll make the arrangements. Lydia's hand found his across the table. Thank you for trusting me on this. I trust you on everything now. That's the entire point. The dinner was scheduled for a week before their departure. Lydia threw herself into preparations with an energy that still worried Rowan, though Dr. Pembroke assured him she was fully recovered. The house hummed with activity, servants cleaning rooms that hadn't been opened in years, cooks preparing elaborate menus, gardeners frantically trying to make the grounds presentable. Rowan found himself swept along in the momentum. Lydia insisted on updating his wardrobe, citing that his current clothing looked like morning wear. She was right. He'd been dressing like a man at his own funeral for 3 years. This fabric is charcoal gray with silver threading, she explained as the tailor measured him. It suggests dignity without being funereal. And these waistcoats have subtle patterns you can feel with your fingers. Helps you select the right one each morning. You've thought of everything. I've had 3 years to think about what you'd need. She paused. I used to lie awake imagining scenarios where you'd let me come back and help you. This dinner party wasn't one of them, but the clothing considerations were. The admission made Rowan's chest ache. While he'd been nursing his anger, she'd been planning how to care for him. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Good thing I'm staying anyway. The evening of the dinner arrived with terrifying speed. Rowan stood in their bedroom. They'd been sharing chambers again for a week now, a development that felt both natural and miraculous. While Lydia finished dressing. How do I look? He asked, only half joking. Like the Duke of Blackmoor. Her hands adjusted his cravat. Powerful, dignified, exactly who you've always been underneath the pain. And you? Me? Surprise colored her voice. Describe yourself. I want to know what everyone will see when we walk in together. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. I'm wearing deep blue silk, the color of twilight. Pearl combs in my hair. Your mother's necklace, the one you gave me on our wedding day. Rowan's breath caught. You kept it? After everything? I could never bring myself to sell it. It felt like selling the memory of who we used to be. Her voice wavered. I know I'm not the same woman you married. 3 years changes a person. Stop. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with certainty born of practice. You're exactly the woman I married. Strong, strategic, brilliant. I just finally learned to see it. The dinner bell chimed downstairs, their guests arriving. Lydia took a shaking breath. Ready? She asked. As long as you're beside me. They descended the grand staircase together, Lydia's hand on Rowan's arm. He counted steps automatically now, his spatial awareness rebuilt through weeks of practice. The main hall was full of voices, Edmund announcing guests, the murmur of polite conversation, the clink of crystal as servants offered champagne. The room fell silent when they appeared. Rowan could feel the weight of their stares, the shocked recognition. Duke Blackmoor, the recluse who'd hidden for 3 years, appearing in public with the wife he'd banished. The scandal of it must be delicious. Ladies and gentlemen, Rowan said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall, thank you for accepting our invitation. I know my absence these past years has created questions and concerns. Tonight, I hope to address some of them. He felt Lydia's hand tighten on his arm, support and encouragement combined. 3 years ago, I suffered an accident that cost me my sight. In my pain and fear, I made decisions I deeply regret. I drove away the people who cared for me, including my wife. I let pride and bitterness consume me until I nearly destroyed everything my family built. He paused, gathering courage. But the Duchess Blackmoor, in her grace and strength, returned to help me find my way back. Not because I deserved it, but because she saw potential for redemption where I saw only darkness. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rowan pressed on. I won't ask you to forget my failures. They're part of my history now, but I am asking you to recognize that the Duke of Blackmoor is ready to resume his responsibilities, with the Duchess as my full partner in all business and social endeavors. Any dealings with the Blackmoor estate will now involve both of us equally. Someone started clapping. Hartley, probably. The applause spread slowly, tentatively, until the entire room was acknowledging them. Thank you, Lydia whispered beside him, for giving me back my name, my position. It was always yours. I just temporarily lost my mind. The dinner proceeded better than Rowan had dared hope. Guests approached with cautious respect, engaging him in business discussions that proved his mind was sharp despite his blindness. Lydia fielded questions about the estate renovations and upcoming distribution venture with practiced ease. Together, they presented a united front that slowly eroded the skepticism in the room. It was during the third course that Thornwood arrived. Rowan heard the disruption at the entrance, raised voices, Edmund's protests, then heavy footsteps crossing the dining hall. Blackmoor. Thornwood's voice was slurred, drunk again. What a touching scene. The happy couple, reconciled at last. Lord Thornwood, Rowan's voice went cold. You weren't invited. No? How unfortunate. I was so hoping to congratulate you both on your masterful performance. Thornwood's footsteps circled the table. Tell me, Duchess, how long did you rehearse this little reconciliation? How many weeks of playing nurse before you convinced him you were the injured party? That's enough. Rowan started to rise, but Lydia's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Let me, she said quietly. Then louder. Lord Thornwood, you're drunk and you're embarrassing yourself. I suggest you leave before you say something you'll regret. Regret? Like how you regret binding your husband's business to mine? Oh wait, you kept that secret for 3 years. Hardly sounds like regret. Thornwood laughed. These fine people should know the truth about their Duchess. How she negotiated in secret, how she controlled her husband's fate without his knowledge. I negotiated to save my husband's life and livelihood when he was dying and his business was collapsing. Lydia's voice rang through the hall, clear and unwavering. Yes, I made hard choices. Yes, I accepted terms I wasn't proud of, because the alternative was watching everything he'd built turn to ash while he was too injured to fight for it. I don't regret that, Lord Thornwood. I regret that I had to negotiate with a man so devoid of honor he'd kick someone when they were down. Gasps echoed through the room. Speaking to a lord that way, publicly calling out his character, it was social suicide. But Lydia wasn't finished. And since we're discussing secrets, perhaps we should discuss yours. Like how you systematically bought up my husband's debts through intermediaries so he wouldn't know who was positioning to destroy him. Or how you tried to use the leverage clause in our agreement to force Blackmoor into unfavorable shipping contracts. Or how you've spent 3 years spreading rumors about my character to anyone who would listen. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Lydia's voice was ice. I've spent the last 3 months investigating your business practices, Lord Thornwood. I have documentation of debt manipulation, contract fraud, and at least 6 instances of bribery involving port officials. I was prepared to keep that information private until you walked into my home and insulted my integrity in front of guests. The silence that followed was absolute. You're bluffing, Thornwood said, but his voice wavered. Try me. Lydia stood. Rowan could hear her chair scrape back. Leave now, or I'll have those documents delivered to the magistrate tomorrow morning. Your choice. Rowan felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost painful. This was the woman he'd married. Fierce, strategic, absolutely fearless when defending what mattered. Thornwood's footsteps retreated, stumbling slightly. This isn't over, Duchess. Yes, Lydia said calmly. It is. The only question is whether you leave with your reputation intact or in tatters. As I said, your choice. The front door slammed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then someone, Lady Pemberton, Rowan thought, started applauding. The sound spread until the entire room was giving Lydia a standing ovation. Rowan stood and turned toward her, his hand finding hers with perfect accuracy. That was extraordinary. That was terrifying. She was shaking. I can't believe I just threatened a lord in front of half of London's society. You defended our honor, our partnership. He raised her hand to his lips. You were magnificent. I may have just destroyed what's left of my social standing. Then we'll rebuild it together. Rowan turned toward their guests, raising his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you've just witnessed why the Duchess of Blackmoor is an equal partner in all our affairs. This is a woman of courage, intelligence, and unwavering integrity. I was a fool to ever doubt her, and I won't make that mistake again. More applause. This time, it felt genuine, not just polite social requirement, but real respect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and business discussions. By the time the last guest departed near midnight, Rowan was exhausted but exhilarated. Did that really just happen? Lydia asked as they climbed the stairs together. Did I actually back a lord into a corner and threaten him with legal action? You absolutely did. Do you really have documentation of his fraud? Some of it. Enough to make trouble, though probably not enough to convict him in court. She paused. I was bluffing about the extent of it, but he doesn't know that. Rowan laughed, a genuine sound he hadn't made in years. You're devious and brilliant, and I'm so grateful you're on my side. Where else would I be? 3 months ago, you'd have been anywhere else, with good reason. They reached their chambers. Rowan pulled her close, his hands framing her face. Thank you. For everything. For coming back. For fighting when I'd given up. For showing me what real courage looks like. Lydia's arms wrapped around him. Thank you for finally learning to see me, even without your eyes. They stood together in the darkness of their room, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to the same piece of driftwood. The past 3 years had nearly destroyed them both, but somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to each other. 2 weeks until the surgery, Lydia murmured against his chest. I know. Whatever happens, whether it works or not, we'll face it together. Together, Rowan agreed. From now on, everything together. The promise hung in the air between them, fragile but real. The future was still uncertain. The surgery might fail. Thornwood might retaliate. A dozen other disasters could derail their tentative reconciliation. But for the first time in 3 years, Rowan believed they could survive whatever came next. Not because the path ahead was easy, but because they'd finally stopped walking it alone. But for the first time in 3 years, Rowan believed they could survive whatever came next. Not because the path ahead was easy, but because they'd finally stopped walking it alone. The morning they departed for London arrived cold and bright. Rowan stood in the entrance hall of Blackmoor Estate, breathing in the scent of home. Wood polish, old stone, the faint trace of roses from Lydia's morning walk through the gardens. In 2 weeks, he might see all of this again. Or he might return exactly as he was now, navigating the world through darkness and memory. Either way, everything had already changed. The carriage is ready, Your Grace. Edmund's voice held warmth it hadn't carried in years. I've packed your correspondence and the documents Her Grace requested. Cook has prepared food for the journey. Thank you, Edmund, for everything. Rowan extended his hand and the butler gripped it firmly. I know I haven't been easy to serve these past years. You've been grieving, Your Grace. We understood, even when we wished we could help. Edmund paused. But it's good to have you back. Both of you. Lydia's hand slipped into Rowan's. Ready? As I'll ever be. The journey to London took 2 days, spent mostly in comfortable silence. Lydia read aloud from newspapers, updating Rowan on business developments and political news he'd ignored during his isolation. He found himself actually caring again, about shipping regulations, about the canal opening, about the larger world beyond his grief. There's an article here about Dr. Ashford, Lydia said as they neared London. He's restored sight to 7 patients this year alone. The medical community is calling it revolutionary. And if I become patient number 8, then we celebrate. And if you don't, we adapt. Her hand tightened on his. I fell in love with you before I ever saw your face properly, Rowan. In the garden at my father's estate, in darkness during a power failure. You were telling me about expanding trade routes, and I couldn't see anything but shadows. But I heard your passion, your vision, your kindness. That's what I loved. Not your eyes. The memory surfaced, their first real conversation, stumbling through her father's hedge maze in complete darkness during a summer storm that had knocked out all the lanterns. They'd been strangers then, thrust together at a tedious social gathering. By the time the lights returned, they'd shared dreams and fears with an honesty daylight might have prevented. I'd forgotten about that night, Rowan said quietly. I haven't. I think about it every time you tell me you're broken beyond repair. Lydia shifted closer. You're still the same man who talked for hours about building something meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth. The same man who admitted he was terrified of becoming like his father, powerful but empty. That man isn't defined by whether his eyes work. That man destroyed the best thing in his life because he was too afraid to trust. That man is learning, changing, becoming someone better. She kissed his cheek softly. That's what matters. They arrived at the Blackmoor townhouse as evening fell. The London residence was smaller than the country estate, but still substantial, a 4-story Georgian building in Mayfair that Rowan's grandfather had purchased. It had been closed for 3 years, maintained by a skeleton staff who greeted their arrival with obvious relief. Your chambers are prepared, Your Grace, the housekeeper Mrs. Davies announced. And Dr. Ashford's office sent a messenger earlier. He'd like to examine you tomorrow morning, if convenient. Tomorrow's fine. Rowan's stomach clenched with anticipation and dread. Tomorrow would determine whether hope was justified or just another cruelty. That night, Rowan barely slept. He lay beside Lydia, listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her presence. If the surgery failed, this would be his reality forever, navigating through sound and touch and memory. It wasn't the worst fate. Not anymore. Not with her beside him. But if it succeeded, the possibilities were terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "You're thinking too loudly," Lydia murmured in the darkness. "I can practically hear your mind racing." "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I can't sleep either." She rolled toward him, her hand finding his face in the dark. "Talk to me. What are you afraid of?" "Everything. Nothing. I don't know." Rowan struggled to articulate the tangle of emotions. "What if I see you and the weight of everything I've done just crushes me? What if I can't bear to look at my own reflection knowing the man I became?" "Then we face it together. We've faced worse." "Have we?" The question emerged raw. "Lydia, if I see again, I'll have to confront the reality of the last 3 years in a completely new way. Right now I can imagine I wasn't as terrible as I think. But seeing the estate I let crumble, seeing your face and whatever pain I've left there, you'll also see the gardens we've restored, the household we've rebuilt, the partnership we've created from wreckage." Lydia's thumb traced his cheekbone. "You're not the same man who banished me, Rowan, and I'm not the same woman who left. We're both different now. Maybe better. Definitely stronger." "How are you so certain?" "Because I watched you change. I saw you choose trust over suspicion, partnership over control, honesty over pride. That's not the man I married. It's someone better. Someone who earned my love instead of just expecting it." The words settled something in Rowan's chest. She was right. He wasn't seeking to restore what they'd had before. He was trying to build something new, something tested by fire and stronger for it. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked quietly. "A man who made terrible mistakes and had the courage to admit them. A man who loves me enough to let me see his failures. A man who's fighting to become worthy of a second chance." She pressed her forehead to his. "I see my husband, not the Duke, not the broken recluse, just Rowan, and that's enough." They held each other in the darkness, drawing strength from shared warmth. Outside, London stirred with late-night sounds. Carriages on cobblestones, distant laughter, the call of watchmen announcing the hour. The world continued regardless of their fears. But in that bed, in that moment, they built a small fortress of certainty against whatever morning brought. Dr. Ashford's office was in a converted townhouse near Harley Street. Rowan navigated the steps with Lydia's guidance, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Duke Blackmoor, Duchess, welcome." Ashford's voice was cultured, confident, the voice of a man accustomed to performing miracles. "Thank you for making the journey. Please, sit." Rowan settled into the indicated chair, Lydia beside him. Ashford's footsteps circled behind him, then steady hands touched his face, tilting it toward light Rowan couldn't see. The scarring is extensive but localized. The trauma affected the optical nerve connections rather than the eyes themselves. Gentle fingers probed around Rowan's eye sockets. "The recent advances in microsurgical techniques allow us to potentially reroute neural pathways. It's delicate work, and success isn't guaranteed, but your case presents better odds than most." "What are the risks?" Lydia asked. "Standard surgical complications. Infection, excessive bleeding. Specific to this procedure, there's a small chance of making the damage worse, though that's unlikely. More probable is that the surgery simply won't work, leaving you as you are now." "And if it does work?" Rowan forced the question past his fear. "You'll likely regain significant sight, though perhaps not to your pre-accident level. Colors might be muted, details less sharp. You may need corrective lenses, but you would see faces, landscapes, text, the world." Rowan felt Lydia's hand squeeze his. He squeezed back. "What's the recovery time?" "The surgery itself takes approximately 4 hours. You'll remain bandaged for 1 week while the initial healing occurs. After that, we'll remove the bandages and assess the results." Ashford's chair creaked as he sat. "I won't lie to you, Your Grace. This will be painful and frightening. You'll essentially have to relearn how to process visual information. But I've seen patients regain functional sight from worse starting points. How soon can we schedule it? 3 days. I need to assemble my surgical team and prepare the facility. A pause. Are you certain you want to proceed? There's no shame in... I'm certain. Rowan's voice was steady. I've spent 3 years in darkness, doctor. I'm ready to try for light. Very well. My assistant will provide detailed instructions for pre-surgical preparation. Ashford stood. Oh, and your grace? Having support during recovery is crucial. I'm glad you'll have the Duchess with you. After they left, Lydia was unusually quiet during the carriage ride back to the townhouse. Rowan could feel tension radiating from her. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. She sighed. What if the surgery works and you see me and regret everything? That's impossible. Is it? Right now you can imagine I'm anyone. But when you see the reality, 3 years older, worn down by everything we've been through... Stop. Rowan turned toward her, his hands finding her face with practiced ease. I fell in love with your mind, your courage, your ridiculous optimism in the face of my bitterness. Those things don't have faces, and nothing I see with my eyes will change what I know with my heart. You can't be sure of that. I'm absolutely sure. Because I've already seen you, Lydia. In every kindness you've shown, every sacrifice you've made, every moment you chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. That's the real you, and she's extraordinary. Tears dampened his fingers. I'm so afraid of losing you again. You won't. I promise you won't. He pulled her close, feeling her shake with suppressed sobs. We've survived the worst of each other. What comes next can't be harder than what's already passed. But even as he said it, Rowan wondered if he was right. The surgery represented a threshold they couldn't uncross. Whatever happened in that operating room would fundamentally alter their future. All they could do was step through it together and trust they'd emerge intact. The 3 days before surgery passed in a blur of preparations and mounting anxiety. Rowan submitted to endless pre-surgical examinations. Lydia organized their affairs with military precision, ensuring estate business could continue during his recovery. They attended one dinner with the board of directors, presenting a united front that seemed to reassure worried investors. Thornwood, notably, had gone silent. No more drunken appearances, no threatening letters. Lydia's public confrontation had apparently convinced him that discretion was wiser than revenge. He'll be back, Lydia predicted the night before surgery. Men like Thornwood don't forgive humiliation, but at least we bought ourselves time. Enough time to establish the distribution network? If we're lucky. Hartley's already negotiating for warehouse space near the major ports. She paused. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight we should focus on getting you through surgery. Rowan lay awake that final night, cataloging the sounds of London, street vendors calling, carriage wheels on cobblestones, distant church bells marking hours. This might be the last night he experienced the world purely through sound and touch. Or it might be the first of endless identical nights if the surgery failed. Strange how both possibilities carried their own terror. Rowan? Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. Are you awake? Yes. I need to tell you something. Before tomorrow, just in case. Nothing's going to happen. Just let me say it. She took a shaking breath. When you banished me 3 years ago, I wanted to die. I know that's dramatic, but it's true. You were my entire world, and suddenly I had nothing. No home, no husband, no purpose. I moved back with my parents and spent weeks barely functioning. Rowan's chest constricted. Lydia. But then I got angry. At you, at myself, at the unfairness of it all. And I decided that if I was going to survive, I needed to become someone strong enough to never need anyone that completely again. Her hand found his in the darkness. So I volunteered at hospitals. I learned bookkeeping and business management. I built a life that didn't revolve around being your wife. You didn't need to come back then. You'd created independence. That's just it. I didn't come back because I needed you. I came back because I wanted to. Because independence meant I could choose you freely rather than clinging to you from desperation. Her voice strengthened. I love you, Rowan Blackmoor. Not because you're a duke, not because you can see or can't see, not even because of who you used to be. I love who you're becoming, and whatever tomorrow brings, that won't change. The confession broke something open inside him, some last fortress of fear he'd been holding against complete vulnerability. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing each other anyway. They made love that night with a tenderness born of uncertainty, every touch a promise and a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing synchronized, heartbeats aligned. No matter what happens tomorrow, Rowan whispered into her hair, thank you for giving me a reason to want to see again. Thank you for finally being worth coming back to. It should have sounded cruel. Instead, it was simple truth, honest and unvarnished, and exactly what they both needed. Dawn came too quickly and too slowly. Rowan, dressed in the clothes Lydia had laid out, submitted to Dr. Ashford's final examination and allowed himself to be led into the surgical theater. You'll feel the anesthetic taking effect shortly, Ashford explained. When you wake, you'll be bandaged. Try not to panic. The darkness is temporary. Temporary darkness. After 3 years, the concept was almost laughable. I'll be here when you wake up, Lydia's voice promised from somewhere nearby. Right beside you. I know. Rowan reached toward her voice, and her hand immediately gripped his. I love you. I love you too. Now stop being dramatic and let the doctor work. The anesthetic pulled him under before he could respond, dragging him into chemical oblivion where dreams and memories tangled into incomprehensible patterns. When consciousness returned, pain came with it, sharp and localized around his eyes, spreading through his skull like fire. Rowan gasped, trying to sit up, but hands pressed him back down. Easy, Your Grace. Don't move too quickly. A nurse's voice, crisp and professional. The surgery is complete. You're in recovery. Lydia? I'm here. Her hand gripped his, anchor in the storm of disorientation. You did beautifully. Dr. Ashford says everything went as well as possible. I can't see. Panic edged his voice. You're bandaged, remember? You won't be able to see for a week. Lydia's thumb traced circles on his palm. Just focus on healing. Everything else can wait. The week that followed was simultaneously endless and instantaneous. Rowan drifted in and out of consciousness, managing pain with laudanum and time. Lydia read to him, described the weather, kept him anchored to the waking world when morphine dreams threatened to pull him under. Hartley sent word, she reported on the 4th day. He secured lease agreements for warehouses in Portsmouth and Southampton. The board approved the distribution venture unanimously. That's good. Rowan's voice was rough from disuse. What about Thornwood? Still quiet. Either he's planning something or he's finally learned discretion. Lydia paused. Don't worry about business right now. Focus on recovery. I can't help worrying. It's who I am. I know. It's one of the things I love about you, that complete inability to turn off your strategic mind. Her lips pressed to his forehead. But try anyway, for me. On the 7th day, Dr. Ashford arrived with unusual gravity in his voice. Your Grace, it's time to remove the bandages. I need you to understand, what we see today isn't necessarily the final result. Vision can continue improving for weeks or even months after surgery. Meaning it might not work today, but could work later? Exactly. So if there's no sight immediately, don't lose hope. Ashford's hands were steady on Rowan's shoulders. Are you ready? No, yes, maybe. Rowan had no idea, but he nodded anyway. Lydia? His hand reached blindly, and she caught it immediately. I'm right here, not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we face it together. I know. Stop stalling and let the man work. Despite everything, Rowan almost smiled. Trust Lydia to cut through his drama with practical clarity. Ashford's hands began unwinding the bandages, layer after careful layer. The pressure around Rowan's eyes eased. Cool air touched skin that hadn't felt it in a week. Keep your eyes closed, Ashford instructed. When I tell you, open them very slowly. The light will be painful at first. More unwinding, more pressure releasing. Then Ashford's hands withdrew completely. All right, Your Grace, whenever you're ready. Rowan's heart hammered so violently he thought it might stop. 3 years. 3 years of darkness, of navigating by sound and touch and memory. 3 years of imagining this moment, sometimes as salvation, sometimes as torture. Beside him, Lydia's breathing was carefully controlled. Waiting. Hoping. Rowan opened his eyes. At first, nothing. Just the same darkness he'd known for endless months. Panic surged. It hadn't worked. He was still blind. All this hope for nothing. Then shapes. Vague, blurry, but definitely shapes. Light and shadow separating into distinct forms. The outline of a window. The suggestion of a figure standing nearby. Ashford, probably. And beside him, slowly coming into focus like a photograph developing in chemical bath, a face. Lydia's face. The breath left Rowan's lungs in a rush. She was not the girl he'd married. That Lydia had been softer, younger, untouched by grief. This woman had lines around her eyes that spoke of pain weathered and survived. Her hair was different, pulled back severely instead of the loose curls he remembered. She'd grown thinner, sharper, her features refined by hardship into something almost austere. She was absolutely devastating. Rowan? Uncertainty flickered across her face. Can you see me? Yes. The word came out broken. I can see you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not delicate tears, but great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Rowan reached for her with hands that actually saw where they were going, pulling her close. You're crying, he said stupidly. Of course I'm crying, you impossible man. You can see again. She laughed through the tears. What do I look like? You're perfect. Rowan framed her face with his hands, drinking in every detail. You're so much stronger than the woman I married. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself. You're magnificent. I'm older, worn down. You're tempered, like steel that's been through fire and come out unbreakable. He traced the lines around her eyes. These are battle scars. They're beautiful. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and full of 3 years' worth of longing. Rowan kissed back, seeing her face even with his eyes closed. The image already burned into his newly restored vision. Ahem! Dr. Ashford's voice held barely suppressed amusement. I'm delighted the surgery was successful, but we should discuss post-operative care and later, Rowan and Lydia said in unison, then laughed. Very well. I'll return in an hour. Ashford's footsteps retreated. Congratulations, Your Grace. Welcome back to the world. After he left, Rowan and Lydia simply stared at each other, relearning, rediscovering, seeing what 3 years in pain and reconciliation had wrought. I need to see everything, Rowan said finally. The estate, the gardens, our home. All of it. Soon. First, you need to recover fully. Dr. Ashford says, damn what the doctor says. I've been blind for 3 years, Lydia. I'm not wasting another moment. He stood, and the room swayed dangerously. Lydia caught him, her strength surprising. Easy. You've been in bed for a week. Your balance will be compromised. Then help me. He gripped her shoulders. Help me relearn the world. She studied his face, something unreadable in her expression. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile of the Duchess, but something wild and reckless and absolutely genuine. All right, but if you fall and break something, I'm saying I told you so. I wouldn't expect anything less. 2 weeks later, they stood in the gardens of Blackmoor Estate, surveying the restoration Lydia had orchestrated. The rose beds were rebuilt, new plantings carefully arranged. The fountain, that cursed fountain Rowan had avoided for years, was repaired and flowing again. Even the wilderness of the western paths had been tamed into something beautiful. You did all this? Rowan asked, still marveling at the transformation. The gardeners did most of it. I just directed. Lydia walked along the newly graveled paths. I wanted to give you something beautiful to see when your sight returned. You gave me more than that. You gave me hope. He caught her hand, pulling her close. I know I've said it before, but I need you to truly hear it. I'm sorry, Lydia, for everything I put you through, for the years I stole from us, for being too blind to see what I had until I'd destroyed it. I know you are. You've proven it every day since I came back. She rested her head against his chest. But Rowan, you need to forgive yourself too. Holding on to guilt is just another form of hiding. How do I let it go? You don't. Not completely. You carry it as reminder of who you were and who you refuse to be again. She looked up at him, her face clear in the afternoon light. But you stop letting it define you. You build something new on top of it. The wisdom in her words struck him silent. She was right. He'd spent so long being the wrong Duke, then the guilty husband, that he'd forgotten how to simply be Rowan, a man learning to do better. Build something new, he repeated. Like what? Lydia's smile turned mischievous. Come with me. I have something to show you. She led him through the gardens to a building he didn't remember, a converted stable from the look of it, though extensively renovated. She opened the door with obvious pride. Inside was a hospital ward, not large, perhaps 20 beds, but fully equipped with medical supplies, clean linens, and natural light streaming through new windows. What is this? A convalescent home for wounded soldiers. I started planning it months ago, but construction only finished last week. Lydia walked between the empty beds. After I left you 3 years ago, I volunteered at hospitals in London. I saw how many men came back from service with injuries that destroyed their lives. Lost limbs, damaged sight, shattered minds. They needed long-term care and rehabilitation, not just emergency surgery. So you built them a place to heal. I built us a place to give back, a way to turn our pain into purpose. She turned to face him. I thought maybe you'd want to help run it. Use what you learned navigating blindness to help others adapt. Give them the support you didn't have. Rowan felt something shift in his chest, the final piece of his broken self clicking into place. This was how they moved forward, not by forgetting the past, but by transmuting its pain into service. Yes. No hesitation. Absolutely yes. Lydia's smile could have lit the entire ward. Good. Because our first patients arrive next week, and I need help preparing. They spent the afternoon planning, discussing staffing, rehabilitation techniques, funding. Rowan found himself energized in a way business negotiations had never quite achieved. This wasn't about accumulating wealth or defeating rivals. This was about genuine good, about using privilege to lift others instead of hoarding it. As evening approached, they walked back to the main house hand in hand. The estate looked different now, not the prison it had been during Rowan's isolation, but a home full of possibility. There's one more thing, Lydia said as they reached the entrance. The portrait, the one you removed from the gallery. Rowan stiffened. What about it? I had it restored. The canvas was damaged when it was taken down, but I found someone to repair it. She watched his face carefully. I thought maybe we could hang it again. Not in the same place necessarily, but somewhere that honors what we had without pretending the pain didn't happen. The suggestion should have hurt. Instead, it felt like release. Can I see it? She led him to a small sitting room he rarely used. There, leaning against the wall, was the portrait. Rowan and Lydia on their wedding day. Young and naive and blindingly hopeful. The restoration work was flawless. You couldn't tell it had ever been damaged. Rowan stared at his painted self, a man who'd thought happiness was a right rather than something to be built and maintained through effort. A man who'd had everything and understood nothing. I was so arrogant, he said quietly. Looking at him, I can see it. The certainty that nothing could touch me, that love was something to possess rather than nurture. You were young. We both were. Lydia stood beside him, studying their captured faces. But I don't think we should hang this in the gallery. No? No. I think we should commission a new portrait of who we are now, older, scarred, wiser. A portrait that tells the truth about survival instead of selling fantasy about perfection. The idea resonated like a bell. Yes, exactly that. They stood together, looking at who they'd been, grateful for the distance between then and now. The past would always be part of their story, but it didn't have to be the whole story. 6 months later, Blackmoor Estate hosted its grandest event in a decade, a ball celebrating the official opening of the Blackmoor Convalescent Home. Over 200 guests filled the halls, a mix of society elite, business partners, military officials, and common citizens grateful for the facility's existence. Rowan stood at the top of the grand staircase, Lydia beside him, watching the crowd below. His vision still wasn't perfect, Colors were muted, details sometimes blurred, but he could see enough to appreciate the transformation. The estate gleamed, the guests laughed and danced, and beside him stood the woman who'd saved him in every way a person could be saved. "Ready?" Lydia asked, adjusting his cravat one final time. "With you?" "Always." They descended together to thunderous applause. Rowan gave a brief speech thanking everyone for their support, then formally dedicated the convalescent home to Lydia. "My wife had the vision for this place when I was still trapped in darkness," he told the assembled crowd. "She saw possibility where I saw only pain. She turned personal tragedy into public good. This home stands as testament not to my redemption, but to her unwavering grace and strength. Everything good that happens here flows from her courage." More applause. Lydia's hand tightened on his arm. "You didn't have to," she began. "I did, and I will keep doing it until you finally believe how extraordinary you are." The ball continued late into the night. At one point, Rowan found himself face to face with Lord Thornwood, who'd arrived with obvious reluctance. "Blackmoor." Thornwood's greeting was stiff. "Impressive facility." "Thank you." Though the credit belongs to the Duchess, Rowan studied the man who'd once been his greatest enemy. "I appreciate your donation to the construction fund." Thornwood shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, after your wife's very public threat of exposure, contributing seemed prudent." "It was more than prudent, it was decent. Thank you." The acknowledgement seemed to catch Thornwood off guard. You're welcome." "And Blackmoor?" "About the leverage clause in the debt agreement. We're moving forward with the distribution network regardless. If you want to partner, Hartley can discuss terms. If not, we'll build it independently." Rowan kept his voice level. "But I'm done letting old resentments dictate business decisions. Life's too short." Thornwood studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." "Yes, for the better, I hope." "Undoubtedly." Thornwood nodded stiffly. "I'll speak with Hartley about partnership terms. The Duchess was right. Cooperation benefits us both more than competition." After he left, Lydia appeared with champagne. "Did I just see you having a civil conversation with Thornwood?" "Miracles happen. I have proof." He gestured at his eyes. She laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Come on. They're about to unveil the new portrait." The portrait hung in the main hall where everyone could see it. When the silk covering was removed, gasps rippled through the crowd. The painting showed Rowan and Lydia in the gardens, not posed formally, but caught in a moment of genuine connection. Rowan's hand was extended toward Lydia, helping her across an uneven path. She was looking back at him with a smile that held both love and exasperation. Their faces showed age, experience, the weight of survival, but more than that, they showed partnership. Two people navigating difficult terrain together, supporting each other through obstacles. It was perfect. "What do you think?" the artist asked nervously. "It's truth," Rowan said simply. "Exactly what we asked for." The celebration continued until dawn touched the horizon. Rowan and Lydia finally escaped to the gardens as the last guest departed, seeking quiet after hours of noise. "We did it," Lydia said, settling onto the fountain's edge, the same fountain Rowan had avoided for years. "We actually built something good from all that pain." "You did it. I just stopped fighting long enough to help." Rowan sat beside her, their reflections visible in the water below. 3 years ago, I sat in my study convinced my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. And now? Now I understand I hadn't lost anything yet. I was in the process of throwing it away." He took her hand, studying the simple gold band she'd never removed despite everything. "But you wouldn't let me. You came back and forced me to fight for something worth keeping. I came back because walking away the first time nearly killed me. I couldn't do it twice." Lydia leaned into him. "Even when you were at your worst, some part of me still believed in who you could be. Was I worth the faith? Ask me in 50 years. Rowan laughed, pulling her closer. "Deal." They sat in companionable silence as dawn brightened into full morning. The estate woke around them, servants beginning their routines, birds singing, the distant sound of wounded soldiers arriving for the convalescent home's first official day. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked quietly. "Coming back?" Giving me another chance when anyone rational would have stayed away? Lydia considered the question seriously. Sometimes I regret how hard it was, how much it hurt to watch you hurt, but I've never regretted the choice itself. Because this, she gestured at the estate, the home, the life they'd built. This is real, messy and complicated and earned through actual effort. That's worth more than any easy happiness. Even when I was insufferable? Especially then. Anyone can love someone when it's easy. Real love is choosing someone anyway when it's hard. The simple truth of it settled in Rowan's chest like an anchor. They'd had easy love once, the thoughtless affection of youth. It had shattered under pressure because it had no foundation. This, what they'd built from wreckage and pain, was different, stronger, tested by fire and proven unbreakable. I love you, Rowan said, the words inadequate but necessary. Not because you're convenient or because you fit some ideal. I love you because you're you, stubborn and brilliant and fierce and kind. You're my partner in every way that matters. I love you too. The real you. Not the Duke or the broken man or the reformed sinner, just Rowan. She kissed him softly. My Rowan. In the distance, the convalescent home's first patients were being settled into their rooms. The distribution network was weeks away from operational status. A dozen business challenges and social complications waited for attention. But in that moment, sitting by the fountain in the morning light, Rowan felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace. Not the peace of problems solved, but the peace of knowing he had a partner to face them with. The peace of understanding that darkness, whether literal or metaphorical, didn't have to be permanent. The peace of redemption earned through honest effort rather than assumed as a right. What are you thinking? Lydia asked. That I was blind for 3 years, but I learned to see in the dark. He turned to face her, taking in every detail of her beloved face. And now that I have my sight back, I'm never looking away from what matters again. Which is? You, us. The life we're building together. He stood, offering his hand. Shall we? The day awaits. She took his hand, standing with the grace and strength that defined her. Lead on, Your Grace. Actually, Rowan said, pulling her into step beside him, I was thinking we could walk together, side by side, as equals. Lydia's smile was radiant. Even better. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. The past couldn't be undone. The scars couldn't be erased. But they'd learned that survival wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about choosing to grow through it rather than being broken by it. Rowan had spent 3 years in darkness learning that lesson. But the truest sight had come not from surgical intervention, but from finally opening his heart to the woman who'd never stopped believing he could be better. And in the gardens they'd rebuilt together, in the home they'd reclaimed from bitterness, in the partnership they'd forged from wreckage, Rowan Blackmoor finally understood the greatest truth of all. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn what really matters. And what mattered was standing right beside him, ready to face the world together.